morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the May 4th, 2023 State Board of Education meeting. I'm Eric Davis, Chair of the Board, and I call this meeting to order. We are delighted and honored to be meeting today, as we have the last 2 days, on the Charlotte campus of the University of North Carolina, the home of the Charlotte 49ers. And our thanks to Chancellor Gaber and Dean Butler for hosting us these past 3 days. This university does a marvelous job of serving the entire state of North Carolina, but in particular the Southwest region. And we're thankful for every graduate, particularly every teacher and principal that have graduated from this fine institution and joined our public education team here in North Carolina. So on behalf of my colleagues on the board, thank you to the 49ers for what you have done and what we continue to do together as partners in public education. I want to welcome all board members, advisors, staff, on-site visitors, online listeners, and Twitter followers. And remember to follow the State Board of Education on Twitter at EDStateBoard_NC. I remind the audience and those listening that this body meets monthly, and its official meeting is the first Thursday of the month, which is today. Due to our planning and work session held on Tuesday and Wednesday, discussion of agenda items will be held today, along with action on our action agenda for later this afternoon. And if you're an on-site visitor, online listener, remind you, you can follow the meeting online and see the materials by going to SBE meetings at www.ncpublicschools.org. We have many celebrations today, but one that's at the very top of the list is a week-long celebration, Teacher Appreciation Week, which celebrated in the first full week of May, from May 7th through May 8th in 2023. And it's when we give the teachers just a small bit of the extra credit they so well deserve. The big day is Teacher Appreciation Day on May 5th, 2023, tomorrow. So please join us in celebrating and honoring all of our teachers and recognizing the lasting contributions they make to our lives and the lives of every student. Board members, you're reminded that it's our duty to avoid conflicts of interest and the appearance of conflicts of interest as we handle the work of this board. Does any member of the board know of any conflict of interest or any appearance of conflict with respect to any matters coming before us at this meeting? If so, please state them for the record. If during the meeting you become aware of an actual or apparent conflict of interest, please bring the matter to the attention of the chair. It will then be your duty to abstain from participating in discussion on the matter and from voting on the matter. Board members, you've received the agenda last week and had the opportunity to review it. I ask if there are any requests for changes to the agenda. Hearing none, I request a motion for approval of the May 4th, 2023 State Board of Education agenda.
Treasurer Falwell makes a motion.
Motion by the treasurer. Is there a second? Second by Ms. Kamnitz. Dr. Petrie Martin.
Dr. Oxendine.
Yes.
Mrs. Kamnitz. Mr. Keenan.
Yes.
Mr. Hull. Dr. Tipton Rogers.
Yes.
Mrs. White. Yes. Mr. Blackburn.
Yes.
Dr. Ford.
Yes.
Treasurer Falwell.
Yes.
Lieutenant Governor Robinson. Yes. Vice Chair Duncan. Yes. Chair Davis.
Yes. Motion carries. We have an agenda. Thank you. We'll now move to our Pledge of Allegiance, and I call your attention to the enormous flag at the front of the room on the table, and call on my colleague, Vice Chair Duncan. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you all. Today we come to the point in today's agenda of our special recognitions. The State Board is aware of many outstanding and groundbreaking K-12 schools in our state. And so we're establishing a new tradition for the State Board of Education at this meeting, in that in this planning and work session and in future biannual planning and work sessions, we would like to recognize a school in the hosting region that has made significant contributions to their students, families, and communities. With a bit of personal privilege, I can think of no finer school to begin this tradition than right here in Charlotte with the Second Ward High School located in the heart of this community. Recently in the Charlotte Observer, in case you missed it, and perhaps it may have been in the N&O, was an article called Carrying the Legacy. I'd highly commend reading this article to you. It provides just one small snapshot of the enduring contributions that this institution, Second Ward High School, has made to not only this community, our state, and our nation. And so at this time, and we are joined by representatives of the Charlotte-Mecklenburg School District for this celebration, and even more, joined by members of the Second Ward High School National Alumni Foundation. At this time, I'd like to turn to my colleague, Dr. James Ford, for a special recognition and ask for all the members of the Alumni Association, as well as the Charlotte-Mecklenburg School District, to please join Dr. Ford at the podium.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
James, could you give them a chance to join?
Oh, absolutely,
Please.
absolutely. As I wait for everyone to assemble, it gives me great honor, and as a point of personal privilege, y'all can come a little closer. Y'all are fine, as long as you don't hit yourself. Before I read the resolution, I would just like to state that as I completed my dissertation studies at the end of last year, the subject of my research was Second Ward High School. Through my own research and meandering around, I heard the story of this school and the communities that it represented in understated Charlotte history and Black community history that really deserved to be recognized, and I fell in love with it. I was fortunate enough to be able to meet with and talk with many of the folks standing up here who invited me in and shared their wonderful stories with me about the school. They shared their personal artifacts. I was able to go to the alumni house on Beatty's Ford, and it's just most appropriate that 2023 represents the 100-year anniversary, so it gives me a great honor to be able to read this resolution. North Carolina State Board of Education, a resolution honoring the Second Ward High School and the Second Ward High School National Alumni Foundation Incorporated. Whereas the Second Ward High School opened in September 1923 as the first Black high school in Charlotte, North Carolina, making 2023 the 100th anniversary of the school's opening. And whereas the school's teachers and administrators, understanding the school's unique opportunity for Black children, created a rigorous and disciplined education environment that was also a place of caring and nurturing that developed pride in the school, its communities, and Black culture. And whereas teachers and administrators were never deterred by limited resources for books, materials, and personal needs, and reached often and unselfishly into their own pockets to ensure that students and families' needs, both academic and personal, were met. And whereas students knew that Second Ward High School's first priority was students, and inculcating into them the pride and strength that comes from learning and the appreciation of strong Black communities and culture. And whereas the Second Ward High School students, teachers, administrators, and the community were pridefully intertwined, all with high expectations for the students and their school, and the promise of great potential unleashed into their futures. And whereas school administrators understood the future success for Black students depended in great part on the depth and success of their education at the school, and worked throughout the school's history with resilience and resolve to expand life-changing course offerings and evening access to education for community members. And whereas facility and program expansion of Second Ward High School even led to evening course offerings for soldiers returning from World War II, for skills and job training, a program so successful that it became Carver College. And whereas Second Ward's appropriately chosen tiger mascot represented the power, courage, protection, and energy that a school and education could unleash among students and the community. And whereas the school's student newspaper, the Second Ward Herald, reported not only on student sports and activities, but also reported powerful examples of current and former Second Ward High School student success to bolster pride and achievement made possible by their school. And whereas Second Ward High School teachers and administrators earned the admiration of parents and community members for their encouragement and personal sacrifices for their students through genuine caring, teaching, mentoring, role modeling, and supportive discipline. Whereas the love and respect for Second Ward High School and those who led and taught there demonstrate the power of a place of learning, high expectations, and a sense of prideful belonging among the beautiful Black community. And whereas demolition of the beloved Second Ward High School in 1970 and closure in 1969 by no means ended the school's reach and impact in the community, and nor in the communities where its alumni reside. Whereas appreciative, dedicated alumni of Second Ward High School understood the long-term positive impact of a short-lived high school and created the Second Ward High School National Alumni Foundation Incorporated, whose mission is to create an enduring legacy of all things that were and continue to be good about the schools and its impact on individuals and its service to and appreciation for the communities from which they drew. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the North Carolina State Board of Education presents this resolution as a tribute in honor of the Second Ward High School for its place in history as the first Black high school in Charlotte, North Carolina, but perhaps more importantly, for its constructive impact on its students, their families, and the community, and for its resolve for creating a place of pride that honored the very best of Black culture and its positive impact on the education experience. And that the North Carolina State Board of Education presents this resolution also to honor and pay tribute to the Second Ward High School Alumni Foundation Incorporated for its recognition of the value, both short-term and long-term, of the power of a school that represents and serves its community, giving it lifelong beyond its physical structure, and that the North Carolina State Board of Education is grateful for efforts to ensure that this place of pride that protected and preserved Black culture and instilled a love of learning will not be forgotten and will live forever in the hearts and minds touched by the school's great good works, and that the North Carolina State Board of Education directs the Superintendent of Public Instruction to enter this resolution into the record this 4th day of May, 2023. Signed, Chairman Eric Davis and Superintendent Catherine Truitt. Now, you get a more official resolution than this one. Please join us in recognizing and appreciating Second Ward Alumni Foundation as well as Charlotte Mecklenburg Schools. We present to you this wonderful resolution. We can take a picture really quickly. If everyone doesn't mind posing just for a moment while we take a semi-official picture to enter this into the record. They're gonna make you bend down. You're good, Arthur. We were joking. Don't go anywhere. Can we get a picture with the state board, if at all possible, and we can get some pictures with the alums as well?
He might could use some chairs.
And that's what I was gonna say, that chair. Thank you.
Come over here, you spread.
Don't want anyone injured taking this picture.
Don't forget the wide angle lens. Can we get a wide angle?
Congratulations to you all. Congratulations.
Mr. Griffin?
Good to see you.
Mr. Griffin? Would you mind? So, in addition to, well, let me just recognize that joining us today is the interim superintendent, Ms. Crystal Hill of Charlotte-Mecklenburg Schools, and the board chair, Ms. Elise Dashu. We appreciate you and your teams being part of this celebration, and vice chair, Thelma Byers-Bailey. But particularly, I'd like to turn our attention to the gentleman that has done so much for our community, so much for our schools. He chaired the Board of Education during some of the most impactful years in our community's history, currently serves our community as a county commissioner. The man just does not know how to stop serving others. And so, Commissioner Griffin, we'd love to turn the podium over to you for a few remarks as a second ward graduate.
Well, thank you. First of all, thank you so much for having us this morning, and thank you for the recognition. Chairman Davis, Superintendent Truitt, Lieutenant Governor Robinson, all the members of the North Carolina State Board of Education. I am humbled. We are humbled and most appreciative for this recognition. As Dr. Ford was reading the resolution, it almost made tears come to my eyes, trying to recall going through a segregated school system with some of the finest educators that ever graced the ground in this community, that understood the value, the deep value of education, not only for us as individuals, but for this great country and great nation of ours, for this great state of North Carolina. I really appreciate my colleagues from Second Ward National Alumni showing up, all of which graduated from Second Ward High School. All are distinguished in their own rights. They all have a wonderful story to tell. We are so proud of this moment. It's our 100th anniversary. Our dreams, our hopes, our passion, our values continue because from 1980, this organization continued each year to give scholarships to deserving students in this community. And we'll continue to do that because we understand how important education has been to us as individuals, to us as families, to us as citizens here in Mecklenburg County, and to us to be citizens of the world. As I said earlier to Chairman Davis, we sometimes think of education in the abstract. I'm an old lieutenant Colonel, retired Vietnam veteran, I can assure you, start thinking about us as a nation and as a democracy. You're not even going to be able to serve effectively to defend your great country if you're not educated. So the value of education just runs in all of our blood. And I want to be able to somehow or another impart to this group, because you have such an enormous responsibility, that we join you in your efforts to make sure that education in North Carolina remains strong and effective and available for all the children here in North Carolina. I want to thank the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Board of Education and staff for joining us this morning. We have a long history together. We'll continue to have a long history together, because I want to make sure that the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Schools is the very best school district, not only in North Carolina, but the best school district in the entire globe. We have the support of this community. We have the support of our citizens, but more particularly, we owe it to that next generation that's coming through. So again, the resolution, it just puts us all on cloud nine. I can't thank you enough. But the Chairman Davis, Superintendent Truitt, Lieutenant Governor Robinson, if the Second Ward High School National Alumni Foundation can ever do anything for you as an organization or for you as individuals, please don't hesitate to call upon us, because if you knew our alma mater, it's to the end. And I'll say this in jest: every one of us dreaded the time when our teachers like Lucille McKay would tell us to go to the blackboard. Back then, there were blackboards, really. And you had to diagram a sentence, okay? You remember that? So we don't talk just about quantity of education, but we talk about the quality of education. And that's what each of you stand for as you do your duties as state board members. I really appreciate the work that you do, and will forever cherish this resolution. Thank you so much.
Let's take a short break and reconvene at 9:40. 9:40.
Healthful Living. We begin with a reminder of the State Board Policy SCOS 012, which guides and facilitates our process. We also have our internal procedures manual, which was recently updated, so more details on this process can be found there. We'll start with science. For science, we are still in process. Data from the survey results, which we are coming up on a draft 3, so we're very close to bringing a draft to the board for action, or for discussion and action. So the DRC met from that data through that last process. They completed their report with their conclusions and recommendations, and then currently the standards writing team, they are preparing their draft 3 of the proposed K-12 science standards. That will be finalized and shared with the state board for discussion and action in the next couple months. For Healthful Living, they are also in process. They are just in a different leg of the process. They are working on draft 1. So for Healthful Living, the DRC has completed their report and they have given that over to the standards writing team. They are working currently, the standards writing team, on preparing a draft 1 of the proposed K-12 Healthful Living standards, which includes a set of standards for health and a set of standards for physical education. That presentation and draft 1 will come to the board in the next few months.
Any questions for Dr. Deck? Hearing none, thank you. We'll look forward to possibly maybe that draft 3 next month.
Yes, that's the goal.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Deck. We have 2 action items this morning. The first one is SLA 1, which is Read to Achieve Formative Assessment Mid-Year Update from Dr. Ryan. And gosh, we started this meeting with in such a positive way, and Dr. Ryan is going to remind us of this set of data that also is extremely positive. So you want to just
Absolutely.
give us a quick reminder of the happy news that you brought us last month.
Absolutely. So good morning, and just an update and a reminder from the data last month that we presented. North Carolina has not only outpaced the growth in every grade level and every subgroup across the national sample from Amplify, but also we now have surpassed that growth. So we are doing great things, and if you look at it across each grade level as well as from kindergarten to first grade, with cohort years, we are seeing the same trends. So everything is moving in the right directions, and we have no changes to report this month.
Any questions for Dr. Ryan? We'll be voting to approve this later on this morning. And then our second item is SLA 2, which is the 2023 State Advisory Council on Indian Education annual report. And is Dr. Silver, who I'm not sure, no one's here. We went in quite some depth into this report last month, and particularly with the recommendations that Stacey has offered. And so this report will also be approved or voted. We'll be voting to approve this report this morning, probably. That concludes the work of the Student Learning and Achievement Committee. Chair Davis.
Well, that was a record time.
Yes, it was.
Thank you, Ms. Kamnitz. We'll now move to the Education, Innovation, and Charter Schools Committee, led by Ms. Amy White. Ms. White.
And Chair Davis, thank you. I took note, Ms. Camden, of the record time, and I took note of the record time, and there are 10 items on our agenda. And so just grab hold of the handlebars and let's get started. I'm Amy White, and Joe Kamnitz and I share leadership opportunities with this committee. EICS 1 was a request that came before us last month for an expansion of enrollment for North Carolina Virtual Academy. I know that Ms. Beccaro is here. Is there anyone that has a question about this enrollment request for NC Virtual Academy? Vice Chair Duncan.
When they approved the request to be made to CSAP, that meeting lasted no more than 15 minutes and didn't have any information in it in terms of what the considerations were. So that unfortunately was not helpful. I did look at them.
Are you asking about the academic data for the school?
Well, it's historically not met growth or not come close to meeting growth since
Yeah.
inception, and I'm,
They're continually low performing.
okay. I will not be voting for this. I realize in the past the legislature has expanded it when we did not vote for it, and certainly it would be their prerogative to do that again if they wanted to. But I can't in good conscience vote for this.
So noted. Any other questions? Okay, let's move to EICS 2. United Community School came before us with a request to amend its mission statement. Board members, you had a chance to review that over the past month. Is there a question about the amended mission statement as presented by United Community School? Wonderful. Seeing none, let's move to EICS 3. Ms. Julie Garber came before us last month with some restart applications from Johnston County Public Schools and Craven County Schools. It was stated during the presentation that there was significant confidence in the ability of the school districts to implement these restart applications with fidelity. Does anyone have a question about the applications from Johnston County and Craven County for restart? I love it when my people follow directions. Let's move to a very meaty topic then. Let's go to EICS 4. These are the remaining charter schools in a very long process. And so before us, you have 3 schools which were pulled from the agenda back in March and sent back to CSAB. Those 3 schools were, April, those 3 schools were Langtree Charter, Westlake Preparatory Academy, and Cabarrus Charter Academy. There were several questions about some of the, you know what, why don't I let Ms. Vaquero just articulate that and I'll be quiet. So there were 3 schools that were sent back and then 2 more, and she'll walk us through each of those and then I'll let you know what the motions will be.
Okay, so we're actually going to be reviewing 5 schools. So this was our very large 38 school renewal cohort for 2023. So all of the schools up for discussion or for action today, the 5 schools all have charters set to expire in June 2023. I'm going to begin with 2 schools, Next Generation Academy and Invest Collegiate Transform. So as a reminder, for a school to fall within a 3-year recommendation for a renewal, what we usually see based on the renewal guidelines are compliance issues more than 1 year, creating a pattern, financially sound audits for at least 1 of the last 3 years, and academic outcomes comparable to the LEA in at least 1 of the last 3 years, or met growth 2 of 3 years. Comparability per the state board policy is within 5% of the LEA's composite score, so we look at the LEA in which the school is where they sit physically. As a reminder, this next school is up for a 3-year renewal. If a school is granted a 3-year renewal, their charter agreement will expire in 2026. The renewal process is a 2-year process, which means that they will enter the renewal cycle in 2024. So next year. So there's really a sense of urgency for these 3-year renewal schools to right the ship and get to where they can get a longer term for renewal. The first school up today is Next Generation Academy. So this school opened in 2018, but they only started with K through 2 students, so they only have 1 year of data due to the pandemic. They are not comparable, as you can see. They were 15 points below the LEA. There were some fiscal concerns that required this school to be brought back to CSAB for additional review. So I'm going to give you the initial review findings and then the updates we've had in the months since. The first one is regarding a monitoring and compliance fiscal review. The report date came out February 2nd, 2023. And what they found were significant internal control deficiencies and unallowable cost of $89,000 in ESSER funds. And those had to be repaid. Since then, there have been additional visits and reviews of this school, and we have been told that they have made significant improvements in internal controls regarding requisitions, purchase orders, additional duty contracts, semi-annual certifications, independent contracts providing their own invoice, and controls in place for executive director level reimbursements. Much of the unallowable costs for ESSER funds was related to construction, like renovations to a building that they did not own or have a 50-year interest in, which is the qualification for using ESSER funds. In addition, they are required to pay back the $89,000 in 2 installments due in May and September. The first installment has already been repaid in March, so now they have the second installment that would be due in September. In addition, the board and its school leaders have been to in front of the CSAB several times. They've also met with school business, and they have committed to oversight and periodic site visits to conduct process audits. And then they have hired a new CFO who has 10 years of experience at a fiscally compliant charter school. The next fiscal concern came out of federal programs and was related to 21st Century Community Learning Centers program. They also found the similar internal control deficiencies that were found from school business and question cost of $19,000. That question cost were already repaid in February. So after hearing all of that, hearing from school business, hearing from the Next Generation Academy school leaders and board, at last month's CSAB meeting, there was a recommended 3-year renewal with specific stipulations. The following stipulations. The school shall provide quarterly financial and academic reports to OCS and to CSAB in this upcoming year. The school shall designate relevant staff to attend federal training, including attending the 21st Century Grant Training. Our office has already met with federal programs to get specific dates and requirements for those, much of which takes place this summer. Our office shall report on the May and September 1st payment due dates. As I stated before, the May payment has already been made in March, so we will be on the lookout for the September payment. And the school shall attend CSAB for quarterly updates to the board. So that is the first school. That is the recommendation that the CSAB made at its April meeting. Any questions about Next Generation before I move on to the next school?
Any questions about Next Generation? All right. The next school is IC Transform, and as a reminder for non-renewal, the renewal guidelines we use to place a school at non-renewal are current and persistent patterns of compliance issues, financially unsound audits, academic outcomes that have not been comparable, and then reoccurring low performance grade of D or F and met or not met. So in other words, continually low performing status. The state statute gives the state board authority to terminate, not renew, or seek applicants to assume the charter school for the following grounds. Failure to meet requirements for student performance contained in the charter, failure to meet generally accepted standards of fiscal management, violations of law, material violations of any of the conditions, standards, or procedures set forth in the charter, if 2/3 of the faculty or staff request it, or any good cause identified. Those six grounds are within your authority to use for a non-renew, which is the recommendation that CSAB has brought to you. So Invest Collegiate Transform is a K-12 school. It's a rather small K-12 school with about 334 students. They have been open for nearly 10 years, and they are here in Mecklenburg County. You can see the academic comparability. They have not been comparable. The local LEA is outperforming the school. But in addition to the low performance, there have been significant compliance concerns that have been brought to the attention of our office and to CSAB and to State Board. So a review of those compliance issues. The first one was brought to us by the Beginning Teacher Support Program, which is a group within DPI who conducts audits and reviews of how schools are doing with beginning teacher support. They conducted a monitoring visit on April 9th and noted 19 areas of concern, but they have also reported in terms of unresponsiveness from the school. In January 2023, there was a guest ESSER and GEAR monitoring review out of federal programs, and there were 39 findings, which according to federal programs is a very large number. In addition, the North Carolina Homeless Education Program has reported noncompliance to our office, including absentee from mandated trainings, failure to turn in documents, and failure to appoint a homeless liaison, which all of our charter schools are required to do, and further lack of communication.
And then in January and March of 2023, school business, specifically student accounting and our office consultants took in-person site visits to IC Transform based on some of these concerns. And the data is on, let's see, yes, this one. So that it's easier to summarize with, for you to be able to see this. At the January site visit of this year, 48 of the 315 children that were listed on record as attending this school were not present. We returned in March with student accounting, and there were since that time, some had withdrawn, but there were 43 that were not present, which is a large number considering the number of students. 20 of the 48 absentee students were not present, marked absent in Power School, so that indicates a concern with how and if they are reporting accurate attendance and accurate student data. And then in March, 43 of the 43 absentee students were also not marked present. Very concerning was the fact that 227 of 315 students were found to have 3 or more unexcused absences. 44 of those had 10 or more absences, unexcused absences, I should say. That would trigger the truancy laws for the state, and at the first January site visit, we saw no evidence of truancy letters. They did update that and improve that or correct that when staff returned in March. And then lastly, in January, for the initial site visit, 62 cumulative folders were missing. So if student accounting or Office of Charter Schools does a review of student records, we often use what we have in Power School as the enrollment and check that into relation to the actual physical cumulative files on campus. And 62 of those were just not there. When they returned in March, when staff returned in March, there were 9. So they had made progress, but clearly not where we want them to be. So those are the programmatic compliance issues that we've had. Financial school business also, of course, does a full compliance fiscal-like review of our renewal schools. And Ms. Shirley McFadden reported that the history of financial noncompliance, including 7 consecutive years of financial noncompliance. So they have been on disciplinary in 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019, 2020, probationary in 2021, and disciplinary in 2022. And then finally, if we look at academic data, the school is continually low performing. Although they have met growth or exceeded in the last 3 years, they have been continually low performing or low performing in the 2022 school years, 2019, 2017, and 2015 years. And then in addition, you can see with their enrollment that they have a decreasing ADM, which is always a concern for the stability of a school. So in conclusion, the Charter Schools Advisory Board has recommended that your board approve the recommendation for non-renewal based on the school's failures to meet student performance. They are a continually low-performing school and have been low-performing in 4 years. The academic performance of the school is greater than 5 percentage points lower than the local LEA. They have failed to meet generally accepted standards of fiscal management, including 7 years of noncompliance, financial noncompliance. And they have materially violated the conditions, standards, and procedures set forth in the charter, including noncompliance with beginning teacher support program, federal programs, homeless education program, student accounting, student attendance, and truancy laws. Are there any questions on IC Transform?
Questions?
Okay. 3 more. These 3 schools were, they were on different timelines, so I'm going to go through each one separately, but they were brought back, all 3 of them were brought back to the CSAB in April, and I'll kind of run through the timeline as to why that occurred. But the 3 schools are being brought together because they are all under the same management company, which is Charter Schools USA. And during the renewal process, which although it has been long, I think has, shows that it is working. in that we are getting to learn more and see more in depth as to how schools are operating and if they're strong. So the first school is Langtree Charter Academy. This school was originally presented at the November CSAB meeting, November 2022. Remember, this takes place over months and months of meetings. They qualified statutorily for a 10-year renewal at the time because we had no significant compliance concerns. As you can see with their academic data, they are comparable, and last year outperformed their local LEA. But the vote to recommend for a 10-year was pushed to February due to delays in receiving the audit. They did receive their audit. And school business reported in February that there are no concerns with the audit. However, during those ensuing months, we received notification from Exceptional Children that there were concerns with these 3 Charter Schools USA schools, specifically related to what is often referred to as MOE. And just as kind of a background, that's considered that's the local maintenance of effort requirement, and this obligates any local LEA receiving IDEA Part B funds, so federal EC funding, to expend the same amount of local or state and local funds as you would for as you do federal funding to ensure that there's a balance. So these, when I refer to MOE, I just kind of wanted to give that background. That's what we're referring to. So Langtree Charter School, they came back with the other 2 Charter Schools USA schools in April. And there were several meetings between Charter Schools USA leadership, school leadership, and EC staff, and our Office of Charter Schools staff. There was a meeting just a few weeks ago, and as of the latest I have, as of April 27th, so a few days ago, the MOE activities are no longer on hold, so EC is essentially continuing to go through the paperwork, and they will occur with the desk review process that takes place for all of the Charter Schools USA schools. Previously, they had been on hold because they were waiting for the correct documentation. What we have found in going through this process with the Exceptional Children's Department is that the issues that they are having are a matter of fiscal accounting. The management company is out of Florida, and there have certainly appeared to be some confusion as to how things operate in North Carolina. Particularly, we use links codes, and they were using a software system that did not provide the correct documentation or easy documentation for EC to be able to firm up these MOEs. So Charter Schools USA has been working with EC. They have hired a local accounting firm, Acadian North Star, to take over this process rather than it coming out of Florida, which I think everyone is hopeful will improve the process. And we also wanted to just make clear that this is an issue of fiscal reporting, but we have no indication that this is an issue of exceptional children not receiving services. So looking at Langtree Charter Academy, they fall within the 10-year guidelines. They came back after all of this was discussed, and at April's meeting just a few weeks ago with CSAB, they affirmed their previous vote of a 10-year recommendation. So that is the recommendation before you now, is the 10-year. Westlake Preparatory Academy is the second Charter Schools USA school. So all 3 of these schools have the similar MOE-like reporting challenges. This school was originally placed at a 5-year. Our office places based on where we consider them to best fit within the guidelines, and then CSAB may change that recommendation. This school was originally placed at a 5-year, predominantly because they only have 1 year of financial reporting, 1 year of academic data. They are comparable, but they are 2 percentage points below the county. And they opened in 2019, so they opened right before the pandemic. They have had the same meetings with EC several January, February, March, and just recently a few weeks ago. And EC is continuing to go through their documentation. They are not a low-performing school. They have a C performance grade. They met growth, and they exceeded both state and local performance on reading and math in 2022. So CSAB in January recommended a 7-year renewal, and in April they affirmed that previous vote of a 7-year. So Westlake Preparatory Academy is before you with a 7-year recommendation. And then finally, Cabarrus Charter Academy. This is a K-12 school in Cabarrus County. They are not comparable academically, and they were originally placed by our office as a 3-year due to the low performing status. They are actually continually low performing. And CSAB in April affirmed that previous recommendation of a 3-year. So Langtree is placed at a 10-year, Westlake Preparatory Academy is placed at a 7-year, and Cabarrus is placed at a 3-year. And those are the final renewal schools for 2023. Questions? Vice Chair Duncan.
I may have missed this. On the first school, Next Gen, what was the recommendation from CSAB?
It is it's a 3-year recommendation, but they have 4 additional stipulations relating to the fiscal concerns.
3-year with stipulations?
Yes.
Got it. Thank you.
Vice Chair Duncan. Thank you, Chair Davis.
On my understanding is these next 3 after Next Gen are all Charter School USA affiliated,
Correct.
and the discrepancies found with respect to the exceptional children expenditures were $1 above the limit.
What I've been told by exceptional children is that when they submitted their MOE, it was just $1 different than the previous year, which they found to be unlikely. So they have concerns about whether the reporting was accurate.
Well, does anyone dispute, in fact, it was not only unlikely, it was not accurate at this point?
No, well, I think what how Charter Schools USA would put it is that they are trying to fix their accounting processes, and that what they're providing, for example, they have in the original kind of submission of items, they submitted, I think it was thousands of documents, and since meeting, that didn't necessarily correspond with how we look at like links codes or PRC codes. And so that was an immense amount of work for EC to dig out of. So since then, at the last meeting we had a few weeks ago, EC did a fabulous job of having a PowerPoint for Charter Schools USA saying, this is what we need this invoice, we need this code, and specifying, please don't send us, just your general ledger, we need this specific information so that we can make sure that what you have provided is accurate.
And have they done that?
Yes, they've provided the information, but I think it's gonna, from what I've heard, as of April 27th, EC told me that they are continuing with their desk reviews, and that because Charter Schools USA is kind of wrapped up together, they haven't completed it.
So as we sit here today being asked for these renewals, we don't actually know what the numbers are. We don't know what the accurate numbers are still.
Correct.
And I'll be completely frank, what bothers me is that having this $1 more, has a level of intentionality about it that it's not coincidental. And our exceptional children I think are precious to all of us, and this gives me zero comfort that it's being handled in the way that it ought to be handled. And I don't understand how we could have a 10-year renewal request when we don't know, even as we sit here now, it's accurate. With respect to Cabarrus, their academic performance doesn't meet the standards for a 3-year renewal, and I suppose the commentary would be that we have had the pandemic in the intervening time, because we've had that discussion some, but they were not coming close before the pandemic or after the pandemic, and so I'm very much bothered by how these schools have been administered, and very much bothered by the fact that it's $1 and still don't have the numbers, and we're being asked to approve a renewal is something that I'm going to leave it at very concerned, and then we'll go from there.
Ms. Becerra, did I hear you say, just in clarification, that the Exceptional Children Department and the Office of Charter Schools didn't necessarily have a concern in whether IDA and exceptional children programs were being offered with fidelity to the students, that it was more a lack of alignment between the financial system that comes out of Florida and the statutes and requirements of the systems that we have in North Carolina?
Correct. We have no indication that it's a programming in terms of what is actually happening in the schools. It is definitely coming out of the management company, not having what they need to satisfy the way we do desk reviews here in North Carolina.
And did I hear you say that they've hired Acadia North Star in an effort to bring better alignment to the reporting system so that they can make sure that the programs that are being offered are reported correctly financially?
Correct.
Yes, follow. Mr. Keenan?
Yes, very briefly, sort of chime in a little bit what Mr. Duncan is saying. One thing is I continue to deliberate and try to vote on the charter schools, and again, I just keep hearing the word that we're supposed to support quality charter schools, just not charter schools, but quality charter schools. And as I move forward, I sometimes get confused what really is quality, because some of these schools that we're supporting, I have questions about that, but we keep, and again, I just want to tell you my personal feelings about the word quality charter schools. I don't have a true definition of that.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Chair Davis?
Back to the EC accounting issue. When will our EC department and financial department, whatever, get through whatever review they need to do of the solutions that have been put in place by the management company to know that we got it right, or that they have it right?
I do not know that they have a confirmed date. I do know that they've been working diligently, but the last update I've been provided was that they are continuing their work.
Personally, for me, it would give me some better insight if we knew how long it's going to take to make sure this solution is now working.
Mm-hmm.
That would tend to move that issue forward, at least in my mind.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Excellent question, and we certainly are working diligently. As you heard Ms. Becerra indicate, there are extensive documents that they will need to review, and what I can say in summary is that what they have reviewed thus far is trending in a positive direction.
Further questions? Superintendent Truitt?
So my understanding of the multiple schools that Charter Schools USA has in North Carolina, that there typically are not academic performance issues with those schools, or are there?
I would have to look back at that. There are a couple that have had academic performance, but I think the majority of them, yes, are not academically performing concerns.
And are the schools in question low-performing schools?
One is Cabarrus Charter Academy.
Cabarrus Charter, thank you.
Vice Chair Duncan?
Yeah, if I could just make one further comment as a backup to something I think you said, Ms. White. I do appreciate the fact that charter schools during this renewal process, first of all, had a lot of renewals to have to deal with, and I know that you would, in terms of the very important oversight and monitoring responsibilities we have, it's a challenge with the number of personnel that you have to give those kinds of duties the attention they deserve. But I do appreciate the work that's gone into this and the information that's been provided, and I want to make sure you and your colleagues know that. And it sounds like other departments are also devoting an awful lot of attention to this process as well. So I give thanks for that. Also, note that when EC is tied up on this issue, that means they're not working on other important EC issues around the state. But so I guess each member will have to determine how much forbearance, but I'm very troubled by what's happened here. And thank you very much for your work.
Thank you. And yet the Office of Charter Schools would absolutely thank the other divisions, because without, school business and regional support and all of the exceptional children's federal programs, we wouldn't be able to provide this information. So it takes having staff not only in our office, but having staff in those offices that are able to monitor charter schools as well, which is very important. Any other questions?
Any other questions? So let me just summarize the motions that will be before us for action for this particular item. So there are 3 schools that we can sort of lump together. Langtree Charter is before us with a request for a 10-year renewal. Westlake Preparatory Academy with a 7-year renewal, and then Cabarrus Charter with a 3-year renewal with the concerns noted. We did have Next Generation Academy, which has been recommended for a 3-year renewal, but I wanted to reiterate the stipulations that go along with that 3-year renewal and get those into the record. So Next Generation Academy has been recommended by CSAB to the State Board for a 3-year renewal with the following: quarterly financial academic reports to the Office of Charter Schools and the Charter School Advisory Board in year 1. Number 2, required federal training, including attending 21st Century Grant training. Number 3, May and September reports of payments that were due regarding the payback mentioned in Ms. Becerra's report. And number 4, presentations by the school to the Charter School Advisory Board quarterly during the term of the 3-year renewal. So that is the recommendation for Next Generation Academy. And then finally, because we have a non-renewal for Invest Collegiate Transform, I would like to read the non-renewal motion into the record. So the motion will be that coming out of EICS, that I move to approve the March 6th, 2023 recommendation from the Charter School Advisory Board that the charter for Invest Collegiate Transform Charter School not be renewed for the following reasons as permitted by North Carolina General Statute 115C-218.6, 115C-218.94, and 115C-218.95, articulated as following. The school failed to meet the requirements for student performance contained in the school's charter. The charter school is continually low performing and has been low performing in 2022, 2019, 2017, and 2015. The academic performance of the school is greater than 5 percentage points lower than that of the Charlotte-Mecklenburg School District, and this is the public school district in which the charter school is located. The school has failed to meet generally accepted standards of fiscal management, as it has a consistent history of being placed on financial non-compliant status. Specifically, the school has been on financial non-compliant status for the last 7 years, which are 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019, 2020, 2021, and 2022. And finally, the school has materially violated the conditions, the standards, and the procedures set forth in its charter due to significant compliance violations, including non-compliance with legal requirements in the following areas or programs: beginning teacher support, ESSER-GEAR federal fundings, North Carolina Homeless Education Program, recording and reporting of student attendance, and violation of state truancy laws. In addition, along with this motion, I would like to ask that the written transcript of Ms. Becerra's report today, providing additional background information, be included alongside this motion for the totality of the motion in whole. So, Mr. Chair, that will provide the summary for the motions that are before us today. Are there any questions at this point? Ms. Truitt.
I guess this is a question for the Vice Chair. Are you wondering out loud if there's in your comments about the dollar difference, if something nefarious is going on? Or is it just a lack of, is it?
I would suggest to you that $1 difference for 3 schools brings to it a level of intentionality as to the number used for whatever the purpose was. It's pretty obvious to us now it's not accurate, and we still don't know, we still do not know as we sit here right now what is accurate. So if I were to summarize my thoughts with respect to 2 of the schools, I would not do a 10-year or a 7-year renewal. On Westlake, it was originally the office, I think, recommended a 5-year renewal, and it got up to a 7-year renewal by CSAB. So I would be recommending 3-year renewals and very close monitoring to make sure this problem has actually been resolved with appropriate stipulations. For Cabarrus, for me, under any circumstances, I would be unable to vote for renewing that charter, given the academic results and given the other issues that have arisen. So that's what I'm trying to suggest as straightforwardly as I know how to say it.
Okay. So I would just remind the board that many schools of all kinds struggle with EC reporting. Mistakes are made very frequently. And I think that my understanding is that the EC department has said that there is nothing untoward happening here, and that the fact that Charter Schools USA has hired someone to manage their external reporting from now on, because this really comes down to differences between the way states do it. And perhaps they should have had someone in place already to manage this, knowing that they're headquartered in Florida, not in North Carolina. But I just haven't heard anything that makes me think that there was something intentional happening.
Can I ask a question? Is Charter School USA the EMO here, or is it the charter holder?
Can you explain that again? Like, what's the question? I don't think I understand.
Does Charter School USA actually hold the charters for these schools, or
Oh,
is it
no,
an EMO?
no. It's the board holds the charter,
Right.
and then the board has partnered with, like, is under contract with Charter Schools USA.
All right, so, I mean, if you trace this back, the board has not been able to follow these amounts apparently appropriately in approving them. Charter School USA has taken substantial amounts under its contract as an EMO to do this, and as I think we all can agree, at a minimum, has not performed this function properly in any way, shape, or form. So I don't think it's an operation that we could be comfortable has operated in a way that's in the best interest of our children to this point.
And I would say that once the discrepancy was uncovered, that the organization has made significant efforts to amend and repair the accounting lack of alignment, and that alone speaks for itself. And we could be listening to a whole list of areas of concern, and that given the fact that we're not feeling like that the students have been denied or have not had quality access to the programs that they are required both by federal and state law, that it's that they've been given the opportunity to improve and have made the moves to do so. Okay, we have a couple of items for discussion. Thank you for your attention. And oh, I'm sorry, excuse me, EICS 5. This is a report on an independent appeal hearing panel regarding East Side Stream Academy's non-renewal. Ms. Picaro, if you'd like to share with us what happened during that appeal.
Sure. So just as a timeline, at the February 6th CSAB meeting, they unanimously voted to not renew this charter school. It is a Charlotte Met charter school. April 6th, your board voted to not renew this charter, and the school requested an appeal. The appeal panel was held on April 27th, and the recommendation is as follows. The North Carolina State Board of Education's decision not to renew Eastside Stream Academy's charter is supported by the facts and consistent with law. The recommendation in discussion includes references to State Board not being required to renew the charter school pursuant to general statute, because at least 2 of the 3 exceptions to the statute's requirement for a 10-year charter renewal applies. In addition, this board is authorized to not renew the charter pursuant to 115C 218.95 and 26.1 of the charter, section 26.1 of the charter, because the school did not meet requirements for student performance. In addition, the State Board is authorized to not renew pursuant to statute because the school is continually low performing and has not implemented a strategic improvement plan approved by the State Board or experienced measurable progress toward student performance goals. So you have the full recommendation and discussion, but that is the summary of the findings.
Are there questions for Ms. Beccaro? Okay, hearing none, I do have a motion that needs to be read into the minutes, and forgive me for its length, but we do want to make sure that we go through this process with fidelity. So the motion today to not renew the charter of Eastside Stream Academy reads as follows. At its February the 6th, 2023 meeting, the Charter School Advisory Board voted to recommend to the State Board of Education that the charter of Eastside Stream Academy Charter School not be renewed and that the school be closed at the end of its charter on June 30th, 2023. At that meeting, representatives of Eastside Stream's board and staff were given an opportunity to present data and arguments about why its charter should be renewed. The recommendation not to renew Eastside Stream's charter went to the State Board of Education for discussion at our regular meeting on March the 2nd, 2023, and for action, which would have been on second read at our meeting in April of 2023. That was on April the 6th. Prior to the State Board's vote, Eastside Stream was given an opportunity to submit written arguments to the State Board about why the charter should be renewed and the Charter School Advisory Board's recommendation should not be followed. After full consideration of CSAB's recommendation and the relevant information provided to it, the State Board voted in our meeting on April the 6th, 2023, not to renew Eastside Stream's charter. Notice of that non-renewal vote was provided to Eastside Stream immediately following the State Board's vote, and consistent with its charter, Eastside Stream was given the opportunity to appeal that decision to an independent appeals panel appointed by the chairman of the State Board of Education. Eastside Stream requested a hearing before an appeals panel and received that hearing on April the 27th of 2023. On April the 30th, 2023, an appeals panel rendered its decision, which included findings and a recommendation back to the State Board for final action. That document is a part of the record before the board for our final decision today. The appeals panel concluded the following. Subset A, that the State Board is authorized to non-renew Eastside Stream's charter pursuant to GS 115C-218.95A and Section 26.1 of the charter because the school did not meet requirements for student performance contained in the charter, has failed at various times to meet generally accepted standards of fiscal management, and has been in violation of the adequate performance requirements in its charter. B, that the State Board is authorized to renew Eastside Stream's charter pursuant to General Statute 115C-218.95B1 because the school is continually low performing and the school has not implemented a strategic improvement plan approved by the State Board or experienced measurable progress towards student performance goals. In light of the appeals panel findings, I move that the State Board vote to not renew Eastside Stream's charter and that the charter be allowed to expire on June the 30th, 2023 for failure to meet student performance and fiscal management standards as described in the appeals panel report. Any questions? Thank you for the grace in allowing me to read that into the record. Concluding our work on charter school renewals and that appeals, let's move to discussion. EICS 6 is a request from Clover Garden to relocate. Ms. Beccaro.
Okay. Clover Garden is one of our older charter schools. They have been operating since 2001 in Alamance County. And this is a little bit different of a relocation request because it is a temporary relocation request. They are in the process of building a new campus for their high school, their K-12 school. And they were scheduled to move in next fall for the new school year, but they have just received, about a month ago, they received notice that due to a supply issue for their main distribution electrical panel, the new scheduled completion date is January 2024. So they scrambled to find a temporary facility to house their couple hundred high school students, and they have found a location. It is 10 miles from their current campus. It is an old retail space that is owned by a church, and they will be occupying, I believe, 20,000 square feet of that space. It will only be in effect for probably, most likely, the first semester of school next year, and then they will move to their permanent new campus, which is only 2.5 miles from the current K-12 campus. But because the temporary location is over 5 miles, you need to approve it.
The supply chain issues, particularly with electrical panels, is cross-sectional in the private and the public sector. And so this is not new, and I don't expect to have immediate relief. So we may be hearing things like this with supply chain issues in the next couple of months. Questions? Okay, that's for us before discussion, so it'll be back before us. Yes, next month. So EICS 7 is Aspire High School. That's before us with an enrollment request.
Yes, so Aspire High School is an RTO school. They are planning to open in the fall. RTO is ready to open. They are requesting an enrollment increase. And just as a reminder, usually we look at the 20% or 30% legislative increase allowances for schools that are in operation. If it is a new school that has not opened, then any change, whether it's 1 or 3 students, like they have to bring it to the state board because it's considered a change to the charter. So in this case, this is going to be a CTE-focused high school in Mecklenburg, and they are requesting an enrollment increase of 32 students. That's 15% increase for them. Their original projected was 210. And then an additional 9th grade class each of the following years. The way their CTE program works is they will only enroll 9th graders. The first year they will open with 9th and 10th, but following that year, they will only take on new students in 9th grade in order for them to be able to actually complete the program as they have modeled it. So having an additional section of students will be helpful for them, and their changes to the facility is what allowed them to have additional students, and that was made in request or in recommendation from CSAB and just looking over their plans. Any questions with this one?
And they are not, they have a high level of interest.
Yes, they have a very high level of interest. Currently, they're almost, I think they're at 90% of their enrollment target, so they're doing really well. And as a reminder, you will hear from you will hear CSAB's recommendations of these schools in June and July. And they have to get final approval from your board in July in order to open that fall. So you'll hear from them again.
Excellent. Questions about this request? Okay, let's move to EICS 8. Movement Northwest also has an enrollment request.
Yes, and this is the same situation. They are scheduled to open this fall. So they have to if they want to change their enrollment, they need to come before this board and make that request. And they are actually requesting a decrease in enrollment. They, as they have submitted new applications, you approved some this last application cycle, they've realized that they prefer to start with a smaller cohort of students. They have found that they always start K-1, but they have found that recruiting first graders is a very difficult proposition because most parents don't want to move a kid right after kindergarten to a different school. So they've revised their model to start with a larger cohort of kindergarten students and then a smaller cohort of first grade. So they are asking for a total reduction of 250 to 125. So it's a reduction request.
Questions about the reduction in students for this new school? Okay, wonderful. Thank you, Ms. Beccaro. Ms. Julie Garber is going to present to you a new restart application from Wake County Public Schools. Good morning.
Good morning, Chair Davis, Vice Chair Duncan, Superintendent Truitt, and Lieutenant Governor Robinson. My name is Julie Garber. Happy to be here and present some more restart applications to you, this time from Wake County Public School. Currently, I want to remind you that we have right now 150, but of course you heard earlier today the 5 under consideration in action. As we always do, we like to connect with you your updated strategic goals, and there you see that we've updated that to the language that you've chosen in the strategic goal. And specifically about Restart, we are looking towards overall growth status as well as subgroup. And just as a hint of coming up in August, we will share that state summary with you from the 2022 data and include that data for you as well. So that is coming. So again, 150 current schools. The 4 schools that you have before you are going to be fast-tracked, meaning they are ready. They've done their planning. We already know that Wake County has 30 restart schools, so they are well ingrained in the process, very collaborative with us as well as their schools. They have strong support between district and schools, so I have confidence to bring that to you. The eligibility, of course, is recurring low performing status, and we've confirmed again, based on accountability data, they are recurring low performing. And we can share with you again that collaborative effort across the district. You have also in your documents budget information that they have submitted for you. And if they are approved, their total would be 34. And just 34 total schools if approved. They are the district with the largest number of restart schools. So again, if they are approved, that would be 154 specific to Wake County, but as the applications before you as well, if those are approved, that would be a total of 159. So any questions about the restart applications for Wake County schools?
Chair Davis.
Thank you, Ms. White. Can you go back to the slide showing the 4 schools?
Yes, sir.
By chance, are these schools in paired feeder patterns?
That is a great question, and I don't know that, but I would be happy to investigate that.
No.
Oh,
No. Centennial Campus is close to NC State. Dillard Drive is close to Cary. Lockhart and is northeast, and Wakeline is near Zebulon.
Spoken like a former member of the Wake County Board of Education.
Yes.
Thank you, Ms. White.
What I could say in addition is if you are interested in that further information of all schools, I could certainly investigate that as far as what that is an important strategy in terms of looking at Restart in the model. And so happy to investigate if you'd like that across all 30 or 34.
Thank you, Ms. Carmen.
Thank you.
I do have a quick
Oh,
question.
I'm sorry, Dr.
That's quite
Oxenine.
all right.
Forgive me.
No, that's quite all right. I do have a quick question. Internally, within the central office or the district office, do you know if someone is assigned, like an assistant superintendent or a deputy, is someone assigned oversight of these restart schools if there are multiple campuses?
Yes, that's a great question. We have what we call a district restart contact that we have in every district. It can be one person or it can be multiple. And so James Overman actually is the district restart contact. He's an area superintendent. And so he is our specific contact. And then Kelly Schwartzel is the senior administrator. And so for those two, they are our specific contacts. Of course, Jackie Ellis, of Chief of Schools, is our main district contact when we do reporting. But to streamline communication, we have those single point of contact first, and then they are in charge of communicating to all of the other area superintendents that have restart schools, as well as senior administrators. Yes, ma'am. And we actually are also working with them in terms of streamlining and aligning and ensuring that the communication from state to district to school is aligned. And so we're actually planning a meeting upcoming for that. Okay.
And just, I mean, major props for Caddy Moore's decision to put James Overman in that leadership position, because Mr. Overman was a fine principal and a leader in a low-performing, high-poverty school. So he has been boots on the ground, eyes on the prize, and to have that type of laser-like focus, given his previous leadership experience, is a true asset.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you.
You're welcome. Sorry, side note. Okay. You guys are doing an excellent job. We are marching right along. Ms. Beccaro, you are back at the podium for us. This is what everyone waits for every year, just on pins and needle. It's the 2022 Charter School Annual Report that will need to be given to the JELOC. We are super excited to hear that report today. Ms. Beccaro.
All right, thank you. So in 1996, North Carolina began its charter school community with the passage of the Charter School Act. This report, we are nearing on 3 decades of charter schools in North Carolina. So in just a few years, we'll be at that 3-decade mark. And this report is going to focus primarily on 2022. So looking at charter demand, as of the December 1st head count of 2022, we had over 137,500 North Carolina students enrolled in charter schools. Our office surveys charter school leaders on their wait list each year. We don't keep the wait list. We don't have that data in our office, but based on their reports, 85% of our charter schools had a wait list totaling over 77,000 students. That could, of course, include duplicates, especially if you're in a large county. During the pandemic, there is a significant increase in charter school enrollment and demand, which has been previously reported to this board in different enrollment reports. But this demand continued into 2022, and charter school enrollment now represents over 9% of the total PSU enrollment. There was the National, I believe it's the National Association of Public Charter Schools, conducted an enrollment trends report, which I believe has been linked in this annual report. And they found between 2019 and 2022 that there was a 19% increase in charter enrollment in the state. And in fact, that makes North Carolina has the 5th highest rate of charter enrollment growth. So where does charter school oversight lie? We are speaking a lot about the growth in enrollment, the growth of schools. Article 14A assigns your board, the State Board of Education, with the sole authority of charter school oversight in North Carolina. The State Board is assisted by the Charter Schools Advisory Board and CSAB, and CSAB is assisted by the Office of Charter Schools. CSAB and OCS are created in statute. If we take a look at the Charter Schools Advisory Board, this board was created in 2013 with 4 expressed powers and duties. Much like how the Office of Charter Schools is described in statute, the complexity of the work has increased, as you all know. The number of schools has increased, and so there are many other powers and duties that kind of roll into that responsibility. If we look at the current CSAB composition, Cheryl Turner, she is currently our board chair, and her term actually ends in just a few months, and that is a State Board of Education elected or appointed position. So you will be in the position of appointing a new member to the CSAB when her term ends June 30th, 2023. The remaining board members are all up for renewal in 2025 or the end of the term, depending on how long they've been on there. The Office of Charter Schools was created, like I said, in statute, and our office exists to sustain the success of quality charter schools through operations, compliance, and support. We are currently staffed with 6 consultants, a shared admin, and an executive director. We are in the process of hiring 2 additional consultants that were budgeted last year, but the process of getting new staff is takes some time. If we look at the figure, looking at growth and staffing over time, The number of staff, the orange line, is actually office staffing. That's the average each month. So that includes all staff, not just the consultants. And due to vacancies or turnover, that's often lower than the actual number of positions allotted to that office. And it's quite evident that it's been flat, and we are currently at 206 charter schools. Currently, our office is divided into 10 workflows. This helps us try to manage complex work with various timelines and stakeholders. So we have 10 current workflows. With the addition of 2 consultants, our office has been in discussion about restructuring how we kind of do our work as the needs and the demand on our office really increases. So what I have is a draft of restructuring plans that are being discussed within our office. And the goal is really organizing work under 3 teams with lead consultants in related workflows in order to provide some more alignment between these workflows, to reduce kind of that silo mentality you get when you're working on different workflows, improving communication, and really refocusing on the greatest needs we have time and attention-wise. So the teams we're looking at is authorizing, which would include applications ready to open, and then preparing for board meetings. Support would include partnerships and school support. We work a lot with other divisions and other areas, and everything from like Teacher of the Year processes to scholarship reviews. So this is kind of takes all of that together. Stakeholder support, academic support and turnaround, which we really want to try to focus more on. And then communications and data would all follow under that support. And then accountability includes performance framework, renewals, risk assessment, and reports and rules. So that's kind of where our office is heading as we gain 2 additional staff members. Looking at charter accountability, charter schools are held accountable through statute, rules, policy, in addition to their charter agreement, academic monitoring, performance framework, the renewal process, which you are all quite familiar with now, and closure and termination. When the word closure is used, it actually often refers to 4 very different types of closures. So there's relinquishment, which is where a charter school or a charter board gives back their charter. That can happen for a number of reasons. Sometimes they have already opened, sometimes they're in the planning process and they just can't make it to the finish line. And so they relinquish. Assumption is when another board takes over another school's charter. That has only happened once. Non-renewal, which we have been in the process of discussing, and then revocation. So you go through the renewal process and you make those renewal terms, but at any point, if there's an issue with a charter school, that charter is able to be revoked. Since 1998, there have been a total of 87 charter closures or terminations. The word is used interchangeably sometimes. The vast majority of those are relinquishments. So 53 have voluntarily relinquished their charters. 1 was assumed, 11 have been non-renewed, and 22 have been revoked. Last year was a busy year. We had 2 revocations, 1 relinquishment, and 1 non-renewal. So 4 schools closed last year. As 4 schools closed, we had additional schools opening, and so since the lifting of the cap in 2011, which had set it at 100 schools, we have now more than doubled that, and we are at 206 schools as of today. Looking at just this academic year, we had 6 new schools open. At the time of this, if we go to the next slide, Maria. At the time of this submission, I had 8 schools that were scheduled to open in the fall. I believe now we are looking more at like 5 or 6. We're going to be processing some delays. And we had 21 charter applications received this year, which you have heard, and I believe 6 standard and 2 accelerated were approved. We just last week, the portal for new charter applications closed on Friday, and we have 16 charter applications, which is lower than we've had, I think, since I've been in the office. So we'll begin that process. We're actually beginning that process in the office of starting to evaluate those. The process of receiving and evaluating charter school applications is referred to as authorizing. And there is a National Association of Charter School Authorizers that does a ton of research and publishes data on authorizing. And I think it's important to understand how unique North Carolina is in terms of charter school authorizing. There are a number of different types of authorizers within the country. So we have non-educational government entities, we have nonprofits, state education agencies, higher education institutes like a community charter board or things like that, independent chartering boards, and local LEAs. If you look here, the vast majority, over 800, are in blue, and those are your local LEAs. So the majority of charter schools within the country are authorized by local LEAs. We are that little red slice, and we are one of 22 state education authorizers. We are also one of only 6 that has one sole authorizer. So your board makes the final approval on charter schools, and only 6 authorizers within the country do that, have one single. If we look at ratios and the number of schools and portfolios, 80% of authorizers have a ratio of no more than 10 schools per full-time employee. And actually, 49% of those have less than 5 schools per employee. North Carolina's ratio is 34.3 schools per consultant. If we look at the total number of schools within a authorizer's portfolio, the average within the United States is 76. That's a national average. And we obviously have 206. So it's just, their data is very interesting to kind of view and understand how North Carolina operates. Circling back to charter applications, we are getting ready to start up the 2023 process within our office, start with external evaluations. The history of charter applications has been a high of 71 in 2013. And actually, a lot of the renewal schools that are up this year were in that cohort of 71 because they were the, I believe, one of the last cohorts to receive a 10-year initial charter. Now initial charters are for 5 years. And then a low of 6 in 2008. The average number we've received is 32 applications, so this year was 16, is much lower than we're used to. And the average percentage of applications approved is 26.26 of annual applications. Your approval usually is very much aligned to the Charter Schools Advisory Board recommendations. There might be some differences throughout the years, but in general, they're pretty aligned. If we look at enrollment, again, we talked about that in the beginning, but this makes it quite clear that in just 2019, just before the pandemic, we had close to 116,000, and now there are nearly 138,000 students in public charter schools. Looking at the demographics and special populations, this is from the 2022 October 1st head count. And you can see that over the years, we've seen the LEA ethnic and racial data fairly aligned to charter schools. What we always see as the biggest difference is the Hispanic population. I think there's about a 7 percentage point difference in enrollment, with more Hispanic students enrolling in the traditional LEA. But looking at the pandemic data from the school year in 2019 to 2021, there was a 14.33% increase in Black student charter enrollment, and there was a 23.34% increase in Hispanic population enrollment. So I would expect over time to see the Hispanic population percentage to most likely increase. Students with disabilities, this has, the comparison between charters and local LEAs has remained fairly flat, as you can see in the graph. It's fairly stable over the pandemic years. The traditional schools are usually a couple of percentage points higher in their total EC count. For charter schools, it very much varies. We have one charter school that I think is close to 30% EC population, and then others that are much lower. So it really depends on the specific school. If we look at EL learners, again, just like the Hispanic subgroup, this is where we see our biggest gaps between what the charter school student population and a local LEA charter school population, with the traditional schools enrolling over twice what the charter schools are seeing in terms of EL enrollment, English language learners. For economically disadvantaged students, we are seeing an increase in the number of economically disadvantaged students enrolling within charter schools. It is still below the local LEAs, but in 2020, so 2 years prior to this headcount, the percentage was 22.48%, and now you can see we're closing in on 31%. We of course can't say specifically what this attributes to this, but we certainly believe that increased transportation, increased access in utilizing the National School Lunch Program. There also has been a federal Medicaid direct certification change, so a child that qualifies for that is directly certified in these numbers. And then there has been additional improvements to the way charters can report their populations. Looking at charter school access, we know that transportation and child nutrition are essential components of access, and charters are required to ensure that transportation is not a barrier to attendance. We have now over 50%, we have 55% of our schools offering bus transportation, like traditional busing. And then we continue to see the participation in National School Lunch improve. So in 2021, we had 76, and now there are 82 schools fully implementing National School Lunch Program. And it does take some time for that to get started, but I believe there are more in the pipeline, so to speak, in getting that work approved. Last year, of course, we did not have academic data, so this is the first year we have academic data for the charter schools. The Accountability Division does a very thorough review of school performance in the fall. If we look specifically at charter schools, we had 53 or 27.2% receiving A or B grades, and 62.6% meeting or exceeding. So you can see that there's certainly a difference between the schools that the number of schools that are coming in at an A or B grade, those high levels of school performance grades, and then the majority of schools which are meeting or exceeding growth. And as this board knows, there has been a lot of discussion about school performance grades and a new model for that. There is I believe it's on Best NC, there is a tool that you can use to input the data from given districts, or if you want to take all charter schools, which is what I have done for this presentation, and essentially play with the model to see how what kind of differences you would have. So this is, Maria, next, let's see, the first, this one. So if we look at the current growth model, we have 7, and this is based on last year's academic data, the most current we have. We have 7 A charter schools, 46 B, 65 C, 58 D schools, and 19 F schools. That is based on our current model of 20% growth and 80% achievement, just like all of the public schools in North Carolina. If we flip that to 80% growth, yes, and this is on Ed NC, anybody can access this. We now have 22 A schools, 82 Bs, 76 Cs, 15 Ds, and 0 Fs. So the number of low-performing schools drastically changes. It's the same if you do this with traditional non-charter schools. But we look forward to seeing how a new model can help us better understand the academic strengths and challenges that these schools are facing. We often get feedback from schools, disagreements about, obviously, concerns about how certain things are taken into account and for their school performance. So that I thought was an interesting kind of way of viewing it. Any questions?
Questions for Ms. Beccaro? Vice Chair Duncan?
We talked briefly before about the report, and thank you for your time on that. Could you, in the past, we've had the percent of charter schools that met or exceeded growth as a percentage, and it's traditionally been around 68 or 69%. I think, according to the report. Mm-hmm. Do we know what the traditional LEA EA number for, which they have traditionally been more around the 74% mark. Do we know what their number was? It's important, I think, for us to understand that relationship.
I do have that data. So in the September report that Accountability puts out, let's see, it was 69.6% of all schools met or exceeded growth expectations. So I guess about a 7% difference. We don't have, when we receive the growth data, it's not usually broken up into like elementary, middle, and high school, just the way that, kind of a difference in the way that charter schools are reported. So when you look into the accountability data for the traditionals, you can really zero in like to a greater extent as in terms of like where the challenges are for growth. But there's also within that state report, if we look at the low performing, there were, for recurring low performing schools, which is what the districts use, the non-charters, between 2019 and 2022, there was a 41% increase, a 41 school, like a number of school increase, and the number of continually low performing charter schools was a decrease of 3, which I'd have to look at the data, but most likely goes to the closures. So what we see is that when a school is continually low performing, and we see that as a trend, and we also see, things like compliance that you've heard from some of the schools today, those schools are often closed, and then that reduces the total number that we have.
Thank you for that information.
Thank you. Dr. Ford.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Really quick question, and I apologize because I stepped away for a moment, but I see we have like basic descriptive data on the subgroups and subgroup enrollment. Is this the report where we look at achievement data according to those subgroups, or is that a different report?
We haven't, I don't know that I've necessarily done the achievement data for these subgroups, but the state report that comes out in the fall, they do the subgroup data, but they don't pull out the charter schools separately.
I feel like at one point in time, in one of these reports, we were able to identify specifically how charter schools were performing with the subgroups. Do we have a standardized sort of template for how this report should look? Because I'm particularly interested in that. I mean, this descriptive enrollment data is great, but I would really like to know how the various student subgroups are performing within charter schools by comparison to the local LEA.
And I can definitely pull that from the accountability data if we wanted to put that in the report before, because it comes back to you next week or next month.
I would really appreciate that. Thank you.
Vice Chair Duncan.
Just quickly, if you're going to pull some other data, we've got 18% of the charter schools are in continually low performing status and 34% are in low performing. For the next meeting, could we have the percentage of the traditional public schools that are in the same category, or categories, sorry?
Okay, yes, so the traditionals compared to the charters in terms of low performance?
Just percentage of schools.
Percentage, okay.
Yeah. You mentioned a hard number, but not a percentage.
I can pull that. And Dr. Ford, for the subgroup data for charters, would you like me to compare that to the traditionals? Because sometimes I get various feedback on that.
I personally would like that, so that we're comparing, apples to apples. I think it'd be fair, right, to compare the charters to the traditional publics. It's a comparison group.
Okay, you guys will see that on the up for action next month.
Okay. Further questions? Excellent. So let me just close the committee report today by, again, giving a nod to Ms. Baquero and her staff for just an incredible amount of work and the Charter School Advisory Board for the work that they did on the renewal process, and just mention to you that they're going right into the process by which charter applications are approved, and meeting with those schools and reviewing applications. And then I'm going to ask you to think about the state's largest school districts, like the Big 12, and the number of students that they serve, and the number of schools that they serve, and the number of people that work in those education departments overseeing the work of those students in those schools. And then I'm going to ask you to look back at the data that Ms. Baquero presented, where we are very, very, for the 10,000th time, shortly staffed to oversee and manage an incredible asset for this state. And when you say to yourselves, why didn't we know this? Who's overseeing this? I'm going to tell you, it's because we only have 6 or 8 people working in that department, and they're overworked. I won't say underpaid, because I don't know who's making what, but everybody's agreeing with that? It is a school system in and of itself. If we want them to run and be the best that they can be, then we need more personnel support dedicated to making sure that they get the attention that they deserve. With that, Dr. Petrie Martin, did I make it? She said yes. I'm done.
Thank you, Ms. White. Just to agree with you, that size of our charter school students at 137,500 and 206 charter schools is equivalent to a large district. And there are states who actually organize themselves using that model. It'd be worthy of our consideration to provide that degree of support and oversight to these schools and students. So, thank you.
Could I eat my own words and ask one final question? I'm so sorry. Ms. Baquero, during that report, Ms. Kamnitz and I looked over at each other and we said, what? So on the list of charter school advisory board members, we have one person who is whose term will conclude this summer, and then a whole host of others whose terms will all end in 2025. Can you reiterate whether those folks can be reappointed to serve for a longer period and how that process works? Because if 13 people move off of the CSAB board all at the same time, we're going to be in big trouble. So explain.
Yes, so Cheryl Turner will need to be, she is coming up on her 8 years. She's done 2 terms, so she will not be able to be reappointed. So you will need to select a new appointment. It is an 8-year, they have 4-year terms, and they can be reappointed once, up to 8 years. So I believe most of the members on the list are in their first term, so they could be reappointed. It just, we also often have, people that leave, and then we have new appointments, things like that. But yes, the vast majority of them are new to the board, so they will be able to be reappointed if they choose, if they accept that.
Ms. Kamnitz, do you want to chime in?
So is this how could we stagger? Is it possible that we could somehow begin to stagger these terms?
So the terms are coming out of legislation, and there has been, because the Senate and the House each appoint, I think 4, is it? Yes. So it's coming out of legislation, and there has been talk of trying to restructure the board in legislation so that it is a staggered term, but that has not come to fruition.
But that's the legislative responsibility, not...
Exactly.
Okay. Thank you. Sorry.
Great. Thank you, Ms. White. We'll now turn to the Healthy Responsible Students team, and I'll call on Vice Chair Duncan for that discussion.
Thank you, Chair Davis. Today we have one item under this, and I report on behalf of our Chair, Reggie Keenan. And we have before us, I'm going to ask Allison Schaefer to come forward, have before us a rules update with respect to draft of interscholastic eligibility rules. We have been asked to further work on those rules, and we have been doing so. There are a number of moving parts with this process, but a lot of work has been done, and Ms. Schaefer and her colleagues can report on that.
Okay, we are in the process of implementing a new law effective this year that was passed in November of 2021, which gives the state board a different role in terms of overseeing high school athletics, including an appeals panel right, independent appeals panel right for appeals of waivers of certain eligibility matters and discipline matters. This is the first year of that implementation. So so we are now in the process of revising and adding to rules on eligibility, which have traditionally been with the High School Athletic Association. We've always had, as a state board, some rules on eligibility, but we need to move those exclusively into state board policy. What you have before you is a draft that is a beginning draft of how those rules might look. The normal process, right now we're only authorized to go through the normal process, which would take up to a year with the public comment period and all that. And we are currently following the law to get these rules in place. However, there is a bunch of legislation pending in the General Assembly that will impact or might impact these rules. And so eligibility rules are a big part of that. We may be seeing changes. If we get legislative changes, we would have the authority to do temporary rules and get those moving more quickly, but we need to see what comes out of the General Assembly. And right now we're waiting on that. There's also some changes in the federal rules being proposed, specifically around transgender athletes. So that might change what drafts you would look at next month when this would come before you traditionally for action. The pending bills would also, one of the pending bills in the General Assembly would also allow for emergency action to get emergency rules in place for the 23-24 school year. If we get that authorization, we'll be doing a fast track, bringing back to the board for emergency authorization for next year. But right now, without those bills passing, we don't have that authority. Again, we are monitoring what's going on in the General Assembly and in terms of how they impact this area. And we anticipate changes to this draft depending on what passes next month. And that should give us a clearer idea. In the meantime, we're presenting this item to you in the normal course of business. Ryan Collins is one of our assistant legal counsel here at the State Board and DPI, and he is one of our rules coordinators, and Ryan is going to walk you through the rules as they are currently proposed.
Good morning, everyone. And I'd like to begin by wishing everyone a happy Star Wars Day, and may the 4th be with you all. All right, so hopefully a little lighthearted before we get into a lengthy discussion. So just a little bit of background context before I start getting into the rules. The way the North Carolina Administrative Code is organized is that you have titles, chapters, subchapters, sections, and the actual individual rules. So we talk about rules a lot, but they are kind of the final level within this larger organizational structure. And so when you look at the Administrative Code, there is a section under the education title right now that specifically relates to, it's currently titled School Athletics and Sports Medicine. And so what you all approved earlier this year that just went through the Rules Review Commission was an expansion of our existing athletics rule to address the administering organization and a few other provisions. And so rather than just continuing to build on that and having an increasingly large and cumbersome rule, I've approached this from the perspective of taking advantage of that existing section and breaking that out into more individual rules that address specific topics. So that's why you have not necessarily one, but actually 4 rules before you today that are going to fit within that same section. There are a few rules. There's actually only one other rule in that section right now that's currently in effect, and that addresses athletic trainers. There are also other rules that have since expired or been repealed. One of the expired rules relates to concussion safety. And in one of the pieces of legislation that's pending in the General Assembly, there are specific directions related to implementing those. So that's something that we will need to come back and revisit at some point. But that is not before you today. So for our very first section, this is 201, Rule 201. This is a definition section that previously existed and has expired. So the proposal here is essentially to revive that rule. It eliminates the definitions that were previously in there because those definitions appear in other sections that have since expired. If at some point we need to reintroduce those definitions, we will, but I imagine those definitions may change because they're medical terminology that probably has changed since those rules were written. So this takes several of the definitions that appear in the current rule, which is 204, and moves them over to their own section along with some additional terms to be defined. So that one's fairly straightforward if anyone has any questions, and if at any point during this discussion, feel free to interrupt me and we can address questions as they come up. So next we're going to look at 204. Now 204 is the existing rule, and this one looks like it's having a lot taken out of it, but in fact what we're doing is just relocating it as part of this organizational structure. And so what would be left in 204 is that this would be the administering organization rule. So this is the rule that specifically addresses how the administering organization, which for the vast majority of our public schools is going to be the High School Athletic Association, and this just essentially keeps the existing rule related to their responsibilities related to enforcing our existing rules. It also includes instructions about the appeals process that Ms. Schaefer previously discussed. Not too much has changed substantively in there, but happy to take questions about that. And then, Dr. Peachmartin, if we could go to 208, because the 207 is going to be the meaty one. So 208, this is the penalty rules. Again, this is essentially just taken from our existing rule and moving it into its own section to specifically address penalty rules for interscholastic athletics. And then if at some point in the future the board wishes to add more substantive requirements to that, certainly can do so. But for right now, it just takes the existing rules that we have and moves it into its own section, or its own separate rule. All right, and lastly, we'll go to the eligibility requirements. So these are where the bulk of the new information is in the specific sections of the rule addressing eligibility of students participating in interscholastic athletics. So much of this is, or several provisions of this are pulled from our existing rule, but we have expanded upon specific areas that we'll go through one at a time. So the first one is paragraph D, which is residency requirements. And just to add some clarification, a lot of these rules, as Ms. Schaefer mentioned, are rules that are currently a part of the Athletic Association's eligibility rules and their handbook that they've been enforcing in that organization's history. And so in the course of developing these rules, we've been in consultation with them, trying to gain a better perspective of why these rules exist, why they're important, where their genesis came from. Every single rule in their handbook, as they told us, has a reason for being there because it's an issue that has come up before. And so we looked at those, we looked at our existing rules, we looked at the authority we had, and this was our best effort to reconcile all of those into rules for your consideration. So residency requirements, this has to do with where a student is deemed to live for purposes of participation in interscholastic athletics at a particular school. So we have several different guidelines here for determining residence based on who the student lives with, what their living situation is. And really the focus here, which you see there in subparagraph 2, is to ensure that students aren't moving around or changing their primary residence just for athletic purposes, that they are not moving to live in a different location just so they can go to a specific school and participate in that school's athletics programs. And that has been one of the goals of this board and the Athletic Association, as I understand it, since its inception. So this is simply an attempt to try to address that particular concern. Paragraph E has to do with enrollment requirements. This is something of an amalgamation of our existing rule, which provides enrollment authority to the local Board of Education and where that student is assigned, which school they're assigned to under existing statute. Something that is new here that we are proposing for incorporation from the Athletic Association, that they were quite insistent about this, is addressing enrollment in charter schools. So as it is right now, under our rules, they have to meet the enrollment criteria for those schools, whatever they may be. But in terms of geographic location, where that student lives, the Athletic Association currently has a rule that says their primary residence has to either be within the county in which that school is located. So this is a charter school, regional statewide public school, or a UNC school, or within 25 miles of the school as determined by an administering organization. So if an individual lives right on the edge of one county and the school is in the next county over, they would still be within that school's jurisdiction. And so as we understood it from the Athletic Association, the intent here was really to try to address concerns about recruiting or having students who live very far away, then moving into another part of the state in order to attend a specific charter school. Part 3 here, this is a question about homeschool students. That is not something that's currently addressed under our rules. For the Athletic Association, they currently have a rule that requires homeschool students to be enrolled half-time in a public school in order to participate in their athletics programs. In conversations with the Athletic Association and other stakeholders we've talked to, there seemed to be a consensus that this was an issue that ought to be left to the local LEAs to address, because it may look different in, say, a rural county. I think it was mentioned earlier in our conversations that an individual who, some of the smaller, more rural counties might have trouble fielding a football team because of the small number of students enrolled in their LEAs. And so they may want to have a policy that allows the participation of homeschool students. So it gives more flexibility to those individuals. I will say there is a provision in one of the pending pieces of legislation that directs the superintendent to research this question specifically of what the role of homeschool students should be. So this is one of those that's likely to be in flux depending on the final state of that legislation, and it may simply not be addressed at this stage of the conversation. Any questions so far? All right, so paragraph F, this is transfer requirements for high school, specifically for high school interscholastic athletics, for when a student wants to transfer schools after they have started their first year of their 9th grade year. And this is a rule that under current legislation we're required to have, but the state board's never adopted one, so we're taking that opportunity to do that now. And basically it prohibits a student from transferring to another school within the same public school unit or in a different public school unit. Basically would require them to sit out a year unless, if it's within the same public school unit, the board has a policy that allows them to be immediately eligible, or by mutual agreement of two different PSUs. So if a student moves from one county to another and they want to transfer, as long as the two schools agree that that's fine for them to participate in athletics at the new school, then they'll be permitted to do so. And again, this is intended to address that concern about people moving primarily for athletic purposes. As we understand it from the Athletic Association, this has worked quite amicably for them so far, and so we saw that as a good starting point for developing a transfer rule for the board. Age requirements, there's not really anything new here from what's in our existing rule, other than we tried to plug a gap that Tom Zyko, who's our other rules coordinator, had found with respect to the small number of 7, 8, and 9 middle schools that we have, grade 7, 8, 9 middle schools that we have. So we are attempting to patch that hole with this revision of the rule. I'm going to skip gender requirements for now because I anticipate that will generate some of the most discussion, and just proceed towards what remains, and then we will come back to that in a moment. Down on page 7, this is paragraph I. This is scholastic or academic requirements. This is another area that has become an area of significant concern, particularly through our appeals process. So we have had a rule, or the state board's had a rule on its books since, I believe, 1982, that has fairly consistently established a minimum number of classes that a student has to take has to have passed in the previous semester in order to remain eligible. And essentially it is you have to have passed one less than whatever the maximum course load is. So under a block schedule, that's 3 out of 4 classes. Under a traditional 5-class schedule, that'd be 4 out of 5. And what the Athletic Association has discovered, and what we've discovered, is that that has gotten a little more complicated as class schedules have gotten more complex. Students are taking all kinds of AP and IB classes. They are taking community college and transfer courses. And so that model just doesn't quite fit anymore. And it's resulting in situations where students might be excelling academically, but because of the way this rule is constructed, they may nevertheless have become ineligible due to taking a smaller number of higher level courses. And so we're attempting to remedy that and hope that we can focus on the intent of this rule is to ensure that students that are academically successful are able to play, and students that need to focus more on academics may be rendered ineligible. So again, in consultation with the Athletic Association, what we're proposing is, instead of a kind of one-size-fits-all rule, it's putting it back to the PSUs to adopt an academic good standing policy. And we've given some parameters about what needs to be addressed in that. So total course load, which historically has basically been the one metric that was used, but also daily class attendance, grades, or any other metrics used by the PSU to establish academic proficiency. And then finally, progress towards graduation. So this puts this on the PSUs to develop a policy to be able to establish that their students are in good academic standing for athletic purposes. And so if you have that second semester senior who has a 5.0 GPA, and they've taken all kinds of AP classes and everything else, but maybe they only had 2.5 out of 4 credits from the previous semester, they would nevertheless be eligible to continue participating in Paragraph J, this is the medical examination rule that's currently on our books. Paragraph K, this is something the Athletic Association had that we thought prudent to include, which is basically prohibiting a student from participating in athletics if they are convicted of committing a felony. And then amateur status requirements, again, this is all coming from our existing rule related to students not participating in athletics after they have graduated unless it's for a spring sports state championship. Signing a professional contract, receiving compensation for any kind of performance, or participating in all-star games. We will say that the Athletic Association has, I think their board just adopted a set of name, image, and likeness rules to address that particular issue. That is not something that is addressed in the draft you have before you, but I suspect will be a part of some future version of this for your consideration. And so I think that is the conclusion of the rules, with the exception of the gender requirements, which is going to be part of our policy discussion. So if we can go back up to there, Dr. Peachy-Martin. So I think, as everyone is well aware, the question of transgender students participating in interscholastic or intercollegiate athletics, for that matter, is very contentious policy discussion happening in our country right now. There is legislation that is pending in the General Assembly related to this particular issue. And so this is something that, and there's federal rules that have been proposed for addressing this particular issue. So this is very much a space in flux. And so what we have provided for you all here for your consideration is a few different options for how this rule might take shape, depending on the direction the board wants to go and how all of the various statutory and regulatory and litigation proceedings play out. So the very first rule that you have here is based on the current rule that the Athletic Association has had in place, I think for several years now. Essentially identify, and much like pending legislation and other things that we're seeing, it does require schools to designate teams either as single-sex or co-ed. And it directs the students participating in single-sex teams will participate in teams matching the sex noted on their birth certificate. Of course, you have sort of traditional exceptions for females participating in men's sports where there is no equivalent female sport, with the exception of wrestling. But then it provides a process for a student who identifies as a different gender from that denoted on their birth certificate to petition the administering organization for an exception to this rule in order to participate on a team consistent with their gender identity. So again, this is adapted largely from the existing process that the Athletic Association uses. The student will write a petition. It would go to a committee that includes a member of the association's board, I believe a representative from the student's PSU, and 2 medical experts with experience in this area. Essentially, they would review the petition. They would look at the student's words, behavior, and gender expression in the community, and basically, in an effort to determine if the student's representation is an authentic representation of their gender identity. They will be able to consider all sorts of different documentation, but the committee, the review committee, would be bound by FERPA, HIPAA, and various other applicable federal and state guidelines related to privacy. So again, that reflects the existing Athletic Association rule. The second option is almost identical to that, with the exception of subparagraph 6 there, which is highlighted in bold. And basically what this reflects is an attempt to something of I would consider a compromise position between the two sort of polar opposites of this issue. And it's also consistent with the guidance that has been proposed by the Department of Education in their new federal rule proposal interpreting Title IX. And basically, because that allows, basically what that proposed rule does is it prohibits categorical exclusions of transgender students participating on teams consistent with their gender identity, unless the school has, or unless there is some educational purpose that is served by that exclusion. So you can't do categorical denials, but you can do it if there's some sort of educational purpose. And so essentially what this addition to this, what this version of the rule does is it allows the review committee to deny deny a petition if it determines that allowing the student to participate in a single-sex team consistent with that student's gender identity would undermine fair play or substantially compromise the health and safety of any student. And so essentially, when you look at what all of our eligibility rules are intended to do, it is intended to ensure fair play, health, and safety. So it seemed prudent to use that as a justification, and that may address some of the concerns that have risen around this particular issue. Option 4, which you see there in blue, is essentially the status of the current legislation pending in the General Assembly, which would prohibit individuals from participating on single-sex teams except consistent with their birth sex. And then the last option is option 4, which is to do nothing. And that may be an option that you want to take right now, given the pending legislation, or just not take a position on the rule at all unless future legislation requires the state board to adopt a rule to that effect. So those are sort of 4 options that have been put forth from the, that are being put forth for the board's consideration. Of course, all of these are flexible, and you can take bits and pieces of different ones depending on the approach you want to take. But our intent here was to try to give you all some options based on where we see the current state of the law and where we see some of the pending legislation and regulatory issues. I will say that just from a statutory and regulatory perspective, this is not something that's going to shake out anytime soon, because the General Assembly may pass a law and then the federal government implements a rule, and then there will probably be litigation related to that. So this is something that is going to be in flux for some time from a legal perspective. But you all, as the policymakers, of course, have the responsibility of making those policy decisions. So with that, I know that was quite a bit of information, but I'm happy to take questions or listen to the discussion.
Well, thank you very much for the review and for the work that's gone into trying to draft these rules and the options that have tried to put in place given some of these issues being in flux. This is a matter for discussion and not for any kind of vote today. So, and as Ryan has forecast, there may be some continuing flux because of some various statutes that are pending and some other federal guidance that's also pending in some of these areas. So, but I open the floor for any discussion today that Ryan and Allison can take into account as they continue to work on the drafting of these rules. Any input from the board?
I have a
Dr.
couple,
Oxford?
I have a couple of questions. Thank you, Vice Chair Duncan, and thank you, Ryan, for the presentation. This is a lot to think about, and I'll have to carve out some time in the next few weeks to read it over carefully. I want to ask, I have a couple questions about, on page 3 of 7, that's where we've spent so much time. Is there another section pertaining to, I noticed that I see middle school mentioned a couple of times at the top of page 3, but will there be a separate section just for middle grades athletics?
So one of the pieces of legislation that's pending in the General Assembly that seems likely to pass would direct us to establish middle school specific rules. I think there would still be some overlap. So for example, the academic eligibility requirements, we would still want to make sure that the school district has some sort of good standing policy for those individuals. There's going to be some variability, I think, because some of the issues related to, for example, name, image, and likeness or amateurism probably aren't as applicable at the middle school level. So as it exists now, those are not separately set aside, but assuming this legislation passes, that's something that would enter into the equation. I think if anything, they would probably be a little shorter, because I think a lot of the same rules would apply, but we also have been speaking with the staff in DPI that currently work on middle school athletics. I think they've been working on the middle school athletics manual. I think that's being presented to you all today as well, and so we're going to be having conversations with them about what that might look like if that specific requirement passes.
And the other question, and I'll admit that the question that I have is making me uncomfortable, but I need to ask it. First of all, I need to make sure that I understand something. So there is currently a provision within the North Carolina Athletics Association. There is a process for appeal process for an individual whose affirming stance is different from what is on the birth certificate. Is that correct?
That's correct, and the option 1 that you see there, it's not identical to their process, but it largely reflects it. It's just written in language that's consistent with the rulemaking process.
So you may not be in a position to answer the question or may not care to even do the research, but my question is somewhat rhetorical. So one could assume, if that process is in place, that we do have, and I'll use the example of trans boys, trans women, I'm confused about the terms, playing on girls' teams in sports in North Carolina, given that provision.
I don't know the exact number, but when we spoke with the Athletic Association, I know there were at least 1 or 2 currently, but the number is very small.
I think the information we have is that there are about 6 or 7 requests, appeals per year, I believe. Is that correct now?
17.
17, okay.
17.
I heard 6 or 7 from some.
Well, I understand there's a difference between, they made that many appeals, but not all of them are granted.
That might have been the number that was granted. I think that may be.
One was denied.
Thank you.
Other questions, comments? All right. Yes. Ms.
Hey
Carter.
there. My comment is just that there has to be a statewide rule. It has to be consistent from district to district to protect our school leaders and our district leaders from getting sued for dealing with. So it's very important that we help with this work and that it needs to be done. And also when you think about state competition, that needs to be consistent because districts will play other districts for championships. So I do think the work is important, but it has to be done on a statewide level. Some people have asked me if I think it should be school-based or district-based, and I do not think it should.
Thank you. Yes, Superintendent.
To piggyback on and to provide some more context for Ms. Carper's comments, I agree with you. And one of the reasons I agree with you that it needs to be statewide is because the Department of Education's guidance is very contradictory. It does not provide clarity. It tells districts that they cannot categorically ban something, but then on the other hand, tells them that they must look at these instances on a case-by-case basis. And that is incredibly contradictory. And so we're putting our district leaders in a very bad situation when we rely on federal rules and guidance that change from administration to administration and are not clear in the first place.
Right.
Yes, Dr. Green.
And I will say, as a high school principal and former coach, that I have seen a transition that is worrisome in lots of rules. As we think back from the attendance rule now to grades and eligibility there, a lot of things have migrated to the way of PSU policies. And it has changed the nature of competition in lots of ways. You see a lot of inter-PSU movement of kids who live in one place but participate in another because it is legal in that PSU, and then they compete outside that PSU in conference, regional, and state championships, where they're not equal, let's just be honest. And so the trend toward moving toward more PSU guidance and away from standardized rules of play at the state level is somewhat worrisome. And I think we need to get back to some more fair play, and then that spirit of it. And I understand why the Athletic Association has done some of that, because they pushed it back and said, hey, look, you guys handle it and we'll do it. But I think we do need something to rein some of that in.
We should point out in that regard that there are some other pieces of legislation not yet referred to in any of these rules that are also pending that could affect some rulemaking. And one of them, for example, has to do with what conferences or what level of conference charter schools should be placed in. And there are a few other like that. But again, we didn't touch upon those in the rules today, but there are a number of issues to follow up on your comments, Dr. Green, a number of issues that are floating there, and we will have to deal with these issues. So this, one of the reasons it's a discussion point today is it's important that we be thinking about it and working on them. And it's also what's going to be very helpful to us that we can get some more guidance to the extent these are before policymakers right now in the legislature and or at the federal level, that we get whatever it is, guidance and or statutory authority we're going to work with in order we can work through these. Other thoughts, comments today? You will have another chance, I have no doubt.
And also, we welcome feedback as you have it. If you have thoughts after this to send our way. I mean, our job is to help you all implement the policy decisions that you make and try to keep you within the bounds of the law. So we will do our best to do that and welcome your feedback along the way.
Well, thank you for the work on it and for the explanation today. All right, Chair Davis, I think that completes Mr. Keenan's report.
Thank you, Vice Chair Duncan. We're going to try to squeeze one more in before lunch, and given this last discussion, it's appropriate that we move to government and community affairs, since much of this item is related to current events in the legislature, and I'll turn to Ms. Kamnitz for the government community affairs work.
Yes, I serve on this committee with the chair, Mr. Hall, and who is not with us today, so I'm happy to step in. I believe that Mr. Falconberry is with us.
I'm here.
Remotely, is that correct?
Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Awesome.
We can hear you, Jamie. So if you want to just go ahead and take us through this very long list of what's going on in the General Assembly.
Thank you, Ms. Kamnitz, and I want to thank Chairman Davis and Dr. Petrie Martin for giving me the opportunity. Somebody's also on at the same time, if they can mute. All right. I'll just keep going. Thank you, Chairman Davis and Dr. Petrie for giving me the opportunity to provide you this update remotely back at DPI. As you all know, this has been a very busy week in Raleigh, and as we speak, both chambers of the GA are wrapping up crossover week. It's been a very fast-paced week as members try to get their bills through the crossover deadline. And so I know I'm the only one standing between you and lunch, so let's buckle up as I try to drive you through this presentation at a reasonable speed. But if at any point there is a need to slow down or you need further direction, please don't hesitate to ask me to pump the brakes. So let's start off with crossover week. Hey, I have a question, Dr. Petrie Martin. Could you pause this or mute the state board audio?
We can't because that's how we get our live stream through.
Oh, okay, I get it. All right, I'll just have to deal with it then.
Mr. Falconberry, before you get into this, let me just say I'm going to sort of, since you're not here, I'm going to try and sort of monitor around the table.
Oh, perfect.
And, so forgive me if I have to interrupt you, but if we have a question, I think it's better for it to be asked while we're on that particular item.
Definitely,
So
please.
I'll just alert you if there's a question.
Perfect. That works. Okay, so just with crossover week, since it's happened this week, we now have more than 70 K-12 education related bills that have made crossover. I want you all to keep in mind that legislation that has any fiscal note or budgetary impact does not need to make it through crossover. So there are some bills that we probably will see in the Senate budget that might show up. And so this does not mean that there's just 70 bills that we're tracking. We're tracking probably close to 100, 150 bills out there. But so many of them will change throughout the course, but once they've made crossover, that's what we're going to focus on today. And just for, so you all know, there were 30 K-12 education bills that made crossover just this week. And in Rules Committee yesterday, there were 50 pieces of legislation that they had to go through rules to make crossover. So very, very crazy week here in Raleigh. All right, next slide. Okay, you saw this slide last month. While there have been bills that have been moving through both chambers, we still only have 6 total K-12 related bills that have become law. It's the same ones that we discussed last time. So I just want to let you know that while bills are moving, they're not getting sent to the governor's desk at this point. So agency related bills. I didn't know how to name this in just about 3 words, but when I say agency related bills, these are bills that we've either actively asked the General Assembly to run on behalf of the State Board and DPI, or these are bills that members have come to us and said, we want your input before we file this bill. And I just want to make that distinction as the next two sections after this. Those are bills that were filed, and then members come and say, hey, what do you think about this bill? And then we give them our thoughts and what the State Board and DPI would feel about those. But just real quick on these career development plans that passed the Senate, sitting over in the House, we still feel very confident that will show up in the budget, if not a standalone bill as it was in the House budget. And then the next one, healthy students, a nurse in every school, both the Senate and the House. It was a bipartisan bill on both sides. But the budget chairs of it was Representative Lambeth and Senator Heiss, both sponsor these bills, which would guarantee that we'd have at least one nurse in every school, which is something that we have all been advocating here at DPI and at the State Board. Computer science graduation requirement is still sitting in Senate rules, and we hope to see that bill move by the end of this month after crossover. Education omnibus, some of those provisions were taken out and put in a technical correction bill. We continue to monitor the other provisions. And then I can't see the rest of it. Okay, Protect Our Students Act, and these are also sitting over this is also sitting over in the Senate. We hope that bill moves after crossover as well. As for the registered nurses in schools, I know this was an interest to many of you. This would remove the requirement that registered nurses employed as a school nurse be paid on the certified school nurse pay scale. It also makes some various other changes to nurses. There were some statutes in there from the 1980s and 90s that were so out of date that need to be updated. And then there's another nurse bill that I'll comment on in a little bit that just made crossover this week. Next slide. So principal licensure, this has made crossover.
Jamie, hold on for a second. We've got a question.
Okay.
So the board had also advocated for social workers as well, and for some additional compensation to get master's social workers who can provide therapeutic counseling. I've seen about nurses here, but where are we on the social workers?
They didn't take that up.
Yes, the General Assembly.
Focus on nurses instead of both the House and the Senate in this bipartisan bill decided to focus solely on nurses.
I believe in the House budget there were some provisions for social workers, though. I'll go back and check on that and get back to you. There were some provisions, but it seems that the General Assembly and multiple members have asked us about nurses specifically, and we bring up social workers, and it seems their focus is on solving the nurse pipeline at this time.
There was also Vice Chair Duncan's question about it didn't necessarily increase the number of social workers, but it did address master's pay for social workers. Is that anywhere still?
I need to go back and look in the House budget. I think there's a provision in there that focuses on this. We continue to advocate for that. And I'll get back to you on that one. There are a lot of special provisions in the House budget.
Thank you. If you would let us know about that.
Yeah, I have two questions.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Keep.
Jamie, I have two questions. Is the amount of money attached to these nurses still $100 million?
I believe so. If Dr. P.J. Martin wants to click the PDF, and if you click edition 2,
I think that's not the one that we're.
Oh, that's not the. Sorry. Sorry. We were talking. Sorry. Go back. My apologies. Oh, it does say 100 million. I'll just say it. If you click on the link, State Board members, yes, it was the other bill. Thank you, Ms. Kamnitz.
And then the other question is, do any of these bills having to do with nurses allow for registered nurses who don't have a BSN to become school nurses? Because that's what the districts told us we needed to change.
That is House Bill 382.
Thank you.
Yes. And there is another bill that I'm going to talk about shortly, but I'll just talk about that since we're talking about nurses right now. House Bill 765, which I do believe made crossover, would allow the state board to develop eligibility criteria to serve for school medical assistants to serve as nurses inside the school building. But when we told them that, we said they don't have the same qualifications as a nurse. So they've drafted that bill to say that the people that can serve in these roles would be a registered nurse, licensed practical nurse, nurse aide 1 or 2, emergency medical technician, those type of people. But they can have a relevant 2-year degree, but they have to be supervised by a certified school nurse. So this doesn't really help in the schools that don't have nurses, but in larger schools, say you have 1,500 in a high school, to help with those ratios, this House Bill 765 would help with that, where you could have more medical personnel in there to assist the nurse that's on record.
All right, looks like we can continue, Jamie.
All right, next slide. All right, principal licensure. As we discussed, nothing has changed in this bill except one of the main things one of the main talking points is to get this bill through crossover. There was not an agreement with the independent colleges and the universities, DPI, state board, on the amount of internship hours. For years, the independent colleges have done about 300 hours for their part-time programs. The universities range anywhere, I think, between 900 to 1,500. Most of them are above 1,200 hours. The research and data says that you need to have these type of candidates to be highly effective, to have at least 1,000 hours. That's what we were advocating for as the minimum. But to move this through crossover, this was what we did, and had conversations with board members about this. How we drafted the legislation is it says a minimum of 350 hours, so the state board could then decide if this stays as is, or if it doesn't move or it doesn't change in Senate, then the state board would have the authority to go above that to require it. Just to give some context for this, we still feel very strongly at the department level that it needs to be at least 1,000 hours. When you take in, when in the state of North Carolina, a nurse needs 640 hours. Plumbers need 2,000 hours. Even your barbers need 1,500 hours in the state. When we're trying to get the people with the amount of I wouldn't say those are internship hours, but those are the type of practical hours that you need before you can get your license. We feel very strongly that we hope that we see 1,000 hours when it comes to the state board. And but I ask, any questions on this one?
Yes, Dr. Oxenide does.
Yes, thank you, Jamie. I just did a very casual research project on 21 interns that will graduate tomorrow night at UNC Pembroke. I did an average of their hours, and the majority of these students are part-time. That doesn't mean they're teaching and they're doing an internship. And their principals are wonderful people. They are bending over backwards to make sure that these teacher interns get high-quality experiences, leadership experiences, while also maintaining their official responsibilities called teaching my students. The average number of hours came to be about, I think it was like 798. Some of the students did manage to go over the 1,000, not many. Some of the students barely made the 500 minimum. Our requirement at Pembroke is a minimum of 500 hours. And they barely made. One student, I looked at her hours, were 503. She barely made it. And this isn't to say that this individual sloughed off, because on a 15-day basis, interns must submit a log of activities. And working very closely with the host administrator, and the host administrator those administrators have been very generous with their interns, even though those interns have full responsibilities for classrooms. So I would say if anyone were to come to me and say, what makes sense in terms of internship hours, I do believe 500 is too skimpy. I know 350 is too skimpy, but I would say 750 seems to be a sweet spot. 750 to maybe up to 1,500 hours, like with our principal fellow students, because they can do that.
So, Dr. Oxenine, what's interesting about the 750, and ultimately, if this bill passes as law, then you all get to decide on that. But what I found interesting is when we were going through this whole process, in statute, principal fellows is required to do a minimum of 750 hours. And when we had conversations with principal fellows, they said, oh, no, we feel our candidates need at least 1,200, I think, 1,250 maybe. And so they actually cranked it up higher than that. And just to give some context as well, if it stays as is with the 350 hours, and we all do understand that part-time you make sacrifices, full-time you make sacrifices, but we are creating two different tracks and tiers for the same license. And I don't think that's what the state ultimately wants to do. And when you do 350 hours, which you even acknowledged that you said it needs to be more than that, but 350 hours when you do a 40-hour work week comes out to only about 8 weeks of real internship experience. And while the other universities and others who are doing above 1,000, you're doing like several months of internship experience, which is a much more robust way of learning the trade of being a principal. So those are just the conversations that we keep having with General Assembly members and stakeholders.
Thank you. Chair Davis has a question, I believe, Jamie.
Only to say, clearly we have a lot of interest in this particular bill and would hope it stays in its current form to return this decision back to the state board to weigh in on and decide. So
Yeah, we can have.
thank you for that support, Jamie. That's when we'll have this conversation.
Yes.
If this bill should pass.
All right.
Yes.
Maybe we ought to move along since we've got a lot to cover.
Yes.
All right. So very interesting. We've already discussed Senate Bill 187, which was the teacher licensure changes, which would allow for a local district to provide an affidavit to DPI to say that they can vouch for the teacher, and if there was a teacher who uses EVOS data, that they were proven to be successful when renewing their limited license, so it would become renewable automatically. But what's interesting is that bill has already passed the Senate, is sitting in the House, and the House then provided a new bill, House Bill 824, that was originally called Teacher License Reciprocity for Every State. And when we saw this bill being drafted, we explained to them that the part of the concern is if you just say that you accept a license from every single state, then you are becoming the lowest denominator for teacher licensure requirements. But we would say, let's explain to it. So what they did actually in the bill is in House Bill 824, they said that the State Board of Education shall grant a CPL to a teacher licensed in another state with substantially similar licensure requirements. So that would be left up to DPI to determine and bring it to the State Board is how we interpret that. But then what they did in this bill is then they added on what's in Senate Bill 187, which is the affidavit for renewing a limited license to this bill. And so it seems like the Senate Bill 187, something's going to become law eventually, but it is a little confusing why we just didn't pass that bill out of the House, but we will continue to monitor it. So there are now two bills that basically do the same thing that have passed, that are working their way through the legislature.
Let's keep moving.
Yep. All right, this one, I would actually kind of recommend that if this does become law, that we Karen Fairley, as Director of Center for Safer Schools, kind of walks you through all these requirements. And I'm not going to spend too much time on it. As you can see with all these bullet points, this is a very robust bill that Representative Torbett's been running for several years now. But with the requirement for the threat assessment analysis that was done by our school districts and reported by the Center for Safer Schools, that finished several months ago. It's the legislature is now looking at how do we actually have school threat assessment teams, and you can see all the requirements that are in this law. But Center for Safer Schools, I really want to commend the General Assembly for working with Center for Safer Schools to make sure the experts were part of this conversation when drafting this legislation. And in essence, it would require all public school units to participate in school safety exercises and programs, and they would have dedicated people would report to Center for Safer Schools to keep us up to date. If you want me to, I can go through more thoroughly, but I think that okay, perfect. Okay, this is when we were talking with Committee Chair Hall about this. This is just a bill that piqued his interest, so we threw this on there. But Representative Budd, a freshman from Mecklenburg County, is trying to get more ID cards into high school students' hands, especially ones that might be in foster care or a very transient lifestyle where they might not have the opportunities to get to the DMV. So this bill is working its way through rules right now. It's got a fiscal note, so it didn't have to go through crossover, but it would pilot the opportunity in these 4 counties, Anson, Gaston, Mecklenburg, and Union, to coordinate with the DMV, where it'd basically be like a field trip where students who did not have access to getting an ID would be given the opportunity to go to the DMV and get ID cards. It would also lower the free ID from ages 17 to 16. So that's why there's a fiscal note to it. Okay. Major General Assembly bills. What all this is are bills that we believe have legs and will probably either end up in the governor's desk or end up somewhere in maybe a budget bill or something like that. So Ryan did a really good job.
Jamie, I think you can do these pretty quickly unless someone wants you to stop.
Okay, then I'll just say Ryan did a really good job on Senate Bill 630 explaining these. If you could scroll down, Dr. Preet Martin, to the next slide. The only difference in these bills is that the House version tries to tackle college athletics. And so I think that's where the Senate and House are trying to figure out how to move forward with this bill. But I do see this a version of this ending up being sent to the governor. And then Ryan did a pretty good job giving the overview of this as well. If you want to, we can skip it. And then this bill piqued the committee chair's interest when we were discussing it. Once COVID allowed sporting events to happen again, districts, almost every single district went to online payment. And so you'd pay with your phone. There's been some heartburn from constituents out there in the state, especially in areas where service is hard to either download the app or buy the ticket once you arrive. So there is a bill that is moving its way through that would require the state board to establish a rule for high school inter athletics so that you can pay with cash and it can't just be paperless or on your phone payment. So all right. So now for the bill that's probably getting a lot of attention across the state. Choose your school, choose your future. There is a Senate bill and there's a House bill version. The House bill has changed, and I'll explain that on the next slide. But as we've heard, the General Assembly has filed a bill that would expand opportunity scholarships and would pretty much eliminate the cap on the economic they're using free and reduced lunch as the standard, but whatever that threshold is, so that if you're 450% above the free and reduced threshold, you would get 45% of ADM for an opportunity scholarship. This also raises it up so that students who qualify for free and reduced lunch fully it used to be you would be capped out, I believe, at 90%, and now you'd be getting 100% of ADM. And as what Senator Lee has been discussing and a lot of the committees is the General Assembly's desire is to kind of focus on a more backpack funding model for the state, and this would all kind of align with that. If you go to the next slide, I know this is what everybody wants to focus on. I don't know if you can see it on your screens. It's a lot of numbers, but the appropriation in the next 10 years would go up to about $500 million for opportunity scholarships in this state. If you go to the next slide, so there is that was part one of the Choose Your School, Choose Your Future. It was part 2 and 3 was originally on the House, and they amended it out. And that's the bill now moving in the House side. What's still moving in the Senate is, and you don't need to read all these bullet points, I'll just explain it, is it would require the state board to come up with a graduation plan for all students that would give them the opportunity to graduate within 3 years, so they can spend their last year either utilizing state funds to go to a community college or to a university school while they hypothetically might be still living at home. And it would also say that, if this provision were to become law, would say that a student would not be required to fulfill any additional courses that are required at the local level. So I know there's some, I think Charlotte Mecklenburg has, 25, 26 is what I saw. I think I saw Rowan Salisbury has about 28. So every student in the state would only be required to do the 22 standard course of study hours mandated by the state board.
Okay, we can keep moving, Jamie.
Okay. And then just these are real quick. These were provisions that were in, except for 765. The other two were provisions that were in the House budgets that have now, I believe, passed crossover. Conflicts of interest training. This is requiring anybody who deals with any type of contracting down at the local level that they, within a certain time period, have to go through conflicts of interest training so that they can fulfill their jobs. And the Standards Advisory Commission, we've talked about this one before. This, I think, has passed the House in other sessions, but this would create the commission similar to the Common Core Commission about 10 years ago. There was one change made on the House floor that it gave appointments to the governor as well as to the Speaker and the President Pro Tem of the Senate. And we already discussed 765. All right. Charter bills. I just want to say that nothing has moved yet on the remote and virtual charter bill. With the addition to the confirmation of the community college president, we will continue to monitor that. And so we can go to the next slide. All right. Charter omnibus bill. This was a topic of conversation at the last board meeting. So this was what the original bill looked like. As you can see, I struck out through part 3 and then put in italics part 7. So if you want to go to the next slide, this is what the new bill, how it's structured. I can go over this in detail again, but I will focus mainly on the changes. So the micro schools, which was part 3 before, was taken out. Now what is in there is to allow charter schools to admit out-of-state students and foreign exchange students. This actually puts charter schools in alignment with what LEAs are allowed to do. LEAs have to charge a fee for this, or they can. I guess they can admit them for free if they want to, but they can charge them for the local funds. In this version of the charter school bill, which is also House Bill 531. This would require that if an out-of-state person wants to utilize a charter school, they would have to pay the ADM for the local district, the local supplement for the district, as well as the state ADM to join these schools. And as for foreign exchange students, it would cap it at no more than 2 foreign exchange students could attend a charter school. As for the comparable per student funding, this provision's still in there, but it is very watered down now. The provision now just states that it is the intent of the General Assembly to ensure that state funding follows the child to the charter school. All the local funding provisions that were of concern of many of the state board members have been removed. And it is just a very straightforward now saying that it's the intent of the GA to fund it. I do want on the next slide, I'll comment on something else with this, but real quick, sorry to go back up, sorry about that. But with the classification of charter and non-public schools of interscholastic athletics, this got edited in the last minute. Actually, it should say part 8. I didn't catch that. But this new section, there's been some LEAs that have raised some concern that charter schools, since they're able to pick from students all over the state or all over the region, that the competition in those schools are they have higher competition than the schools in their area. So what this would require to do is if you're what's it called? If you're one classification for a school, you'd have to go up to number 2. So you just have to go up one higher because there's been a lot of districts that have said that they cannot compete with the charter schools in their area because they're able to they're able to draw from students from all over the state, all over the region. But with the comparable per student funding, if we go to the next slide. This is the big change in how funding has typically happened or has always happened is that a charter school would have to turn in their projected ADM, and they would get funded. I think they turn that in like the end of June, beginning of July. They turn that in. That's what they're funded on for the first 2 months. And then, but what this law would change is because the other provision in the bill allows for charters to go as high as they want on their enrollments, this new provision in Section 7 of this bill would say that you would only get payment for the number of students actually enrolled in the school. So this would prohibit a charter from saying, oh, we're going to have 300 kids and they get paid for the 300 when they really only have 250. They're going to have to show that they have the 250 to get paid. Hope that all made sense. Let me know if I need to ask any more questions. Okay. And then finally, the Charter School Review Board, which was in the House budget, is now a standalone bill. I believe this made it out of committee, made it out of the House floor yesterday late. If not, it will be soon. But as you can see, the sponsors are Speaker Moore, the Rules Chair, Representative Colin Willis. So usually a bill like this will move at least one chamber when it has those type of people on there. Nothing has changed in the bill from what I reported on last time. It would make the Charter School Review Board the one who would be the initial grantee of charters, the authorizer. And if there were any appeals, the law is clear, and I put the legal term de novo in there, is that it would require the state board to have to start from the beginning of the entire process. And what was discussed in committee when the speaker was discussing this bill specifically, they said, when it was asked, like, why is this needed? And they said that the charter school CSAB currently spends, in their opinion, spends thousands of hours looking through these applications, and they felt that those people with their expertise would be the ones to be able to judge the charter schools on the merits of their application. So I think that is it. I try to go through as quickly as possible.
Thank you, Jamie. Any further questions or anything that you would like for Jamie to address that he didn't address? All right. Thank you so much. I think we're good, Jamie.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
That concludes the Government and Community Affairs business for
Thank
today.
you, Ms. Kamnitz, and thank you, Mr. Falkenberry. That was an excellent report. Let's take a break for lunch, and we'll reconvene at 12:45.